Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories podcast. I am your host for today, John DeLynn. I'm here with my lovely, brilliant partner, Margie. Hey, Margie.
Hi there.
It is January 11th, 2024. It's the first long-form Mormon Stories interview of the new year.
Woo-hoo.
So happy New Year. It's good to have you back, Margie.
Thank you.
And today we are interviewing Alyssa Grenfell. We're going to be answering the question, how does a super devout, in it to win it, Orthodox, return missionary, stay-at-home mom start to question her Mormon faith? Temple worker, I think I got many of the check boxes. And that's going to be today's interview.
And then write a book about it.
Right, yeah. Yeah, we're also super excited to announce today is the release of a book that Alyssa is coming out with. I had the honor of writing the foreword to it. It's such a good book. Mm-hmm. I was honored to write the foreword to it. The book is called How to Leave the Mormon Church, an ex-Mormon's Guide to Rebuilding After Religion. This is the book that so many people have needed for so long to help them have a healthy and a peaceful, or at least a minimally damaging transition out of Mormonism or high-demand religion. So in the comments, in the description, on YouTube and Facebook, you can click, or on the blog, you can click on the link to this book. Let's make this international bestseller. Please pause, go buy this book, and come right back. But I just want to make the point that even though Alyssa has an amazing TikTok channel and TikTok channel and YouTube channel that many of you have been checking out and are really valuing, we've heard your feedback that many of you just want normal, run-of-the-mill Mormons, that we don't go for celebrities. We're lucky because we're catching Alyssa before she becomes a full-on celebrity. But Alyssa, you're just a normal Mormon, right?
I was a normal Mormon.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think too, I think what makes maybe this book powerful is a lot of, I think it's a very, it really encapsulates what it means to leave the church for someone who just was your average run-of-the-mill temple attending, got married pretty young, going through a faith transition in their 20s and 30s type of person. And that's how I was.
Millennial generation, right?
Yeah. I am a millennial, born in 92. And so I would say that for me, I wrote this, and I wrote this from my experience, but also to the type of reader that is going through a faith transition, who hasn't experienced, many of the wild things the Mormon Church does do to people, but just an average person who, read the CES letter at 2 a.m. and now is just wondering, what do I do next now that I don't have a testimony anymore?
Yeah. Yeah, and so part one is going to be today, and we're just going to do the long form 2 to 4 hour Alyssa's story. Tomorrow we're going to come back at 10 a.m. tomorrow morning, and we're going to cover Alyssa's top 10 recommendations for how to leave the Mormon Church and do so in the healthiest way possible. So this will be a two-parter. Thank you for joining us for part one. We're always grateful for those of you who make this possible. So Alyssa Grenfell, welcome to Mormon Stories.
Thank you.
Where does your Mormon story begin? Tell us about maybe your parents a little bit.
Yeah, so most of my childhood was in Montana, in Helena, Montana, in one of the kind of outskirt cities, very small, and some of my earliest memories are just the most Mormon memories you can imagine. I remember trying on my mom's wedding dress and dreaming about my wedding, fantasizing about my wedding, and having so many conversations about my wedding at 5, 6, 7 as just this dream of what I was meant to accomplish in my life. And I think I spent a lot of time even in church activity days, doing things like, I have a really distinct memory too of learning to make spaghetti while the boys were playing basketball for their activity, and feeling so frustrated because they were obviously having fun and we were learning to do housekeeping and, taking care of a home, which isn't the worst thing in the world, but when you see the gender discrepancy of the boys play games and the women learn to take care of the home, even at a young age, I felt like that was unfair. And so my parents, we were front row members of the church. On my mom's side, we've been members since Joseph Smith, and my dad was a convert, but served a mission. They were married in the temple, very, very active and devout as well.
And I think it's four total children in
Yes.
the birth order.
I'm the second of all the children.
Okay.
So 3 sisters.
Okay. So your earliest Mormon memories are of your future as a mom, basically.
Yes, and of becoming a bride. Specifically, conversations about my wedding. I remember my mom was setting up a bank account, basically a savings account for us to be able to access once we became adults, and her asking me, do you want to save this for your wedding, or do you want to save this for college, for your, if you go to school someday? And I remember responding, it's for my wedding, because I felt like that was the right answer. That already at a really young age, it was very clear to me that the wedding was going to be like the penultimate experience of my life, was my wedding day.
Did you feel like, with regard to gender roles, that were you receiving, messages in church as well as home? Or when you're looking back, are you remembering more that those messages were coming from like family culture or what was modeled?
Yeah, I think it was a mix of family, what I saw at home and what was being taught at church. I remember the Friend magazine would have in the center, it would have the leadership of the church, whatever that was called.
Yes.
The org chart.
The org chart.
Yeah, the priesthood.
That was, I think,
org
in
chart.
the Friend, or maybe just in, one of the other
Inside,
magazines. Yeah. And I remember just looking at it and seeing only men, and I think now they'd put the women down at the bottom to the right. So at least they're on there. But then it was only the men. And
Yeah.
what a striking visual depiction for a girl who's growing up in a church to be told, like, these are the people who matter. These are the people who we listen to and we ordain and we sustain and so I felt like growing up, it was really clear to me that girls were not as good as boys, but that's what God wanted. And so it was my responsibility to figure out how to bridge the discrepancy there, because it felt like if I felt like that was unfair, I was thinking God was unfair. And that's not something a young Mormon kid thinks. So I tried to cope with that in the ways that I could.
I noticed in your outline you mentioned really liking the movie Mulan.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about juxtaposing that with your Mormon worldview as a girl?
Yeah, I think as a kid, I loved running, and I still love running. And I always loved very, tomboy type things, getting in the mud, running in the stream, just the types of stuff you see depicted in Mulan that she's doing. And that song where, we must be swift as coursing. And she's beating all the boys at the end. And I remember just watching that and feeling so amped. And I went to gym class the next day or that week, and we had the rope, and I was climbing the rope, and I was the best at it in the class, and I was better than the boys. And I just remember feeling like triumphant, because I just felt like I had to prove to myself all the time that I mattered at all, that I could be athletic, or I could be well-spoken or intelligent, and that, I was more than just this pretty girl box that Mormonism wanted to place me in, that I was like this little doll that would age and become a wife, but that I also had a personality that I could keep up or even be better sometimes than the boys. So I did always love that movie, because it just inspired me to feel like, oh, I'm not the only girl that feels this way. And at the end, I actually recently watched it again with my sons, and at the end where the emperor bows to her, and then everyone else bows too. And it made me cry because I needed to see that as a little kid. And when in the church do you see men bowing to women? You don't. So
Yeah. Can't think of it. Can you, Margie? Can you think of a time?
never saw that represented
Not coming to
as a
mind.
kid.
Yeah. Yeah. So as a girl, so not as a teen, but when you're thinking about yourself as a girl, did you individuate that way? Did you run? Did you do the things that felt, what I'm hearing from you, as like more innately you and your expression? Or did you feel like, when you look back, are you like, I was definitely conditioned. I had a conditioned self even as a young girl?
Yeah, I think I felt conditioned. I think I felt like it was okay for me to like these things, but not as good as if I had liked the other things. So I don't think my parents never said, you can't, be in track, you can't be in sports. But I always felt like choosing to play an instrument was a better choice, or maybe doing dance was a better choice, because those are feminine pursuits. And so I never had a moment where it was like, you can't do that. I also was in gymnastics for a while. Like, I think they kind of pushed me towards more feminine sports, or pursuits or hobbies or whatever. But I always felt like that was not the capital T, the right answer that people were hoping for from me.
Right.
So let's talk about your baptism.
Yes. I guess this
Or
is,
anything else that leads up to it that you want to mention.
yeah, no, I think I remember, we train, like, when these kids are getting ready to be baptized, like that whole year from 7 to 8, every class somehow seems to be like it's about baptism. Like, songs about baptism, the lessons are about baptism. You're talking about baptism all the time. Your parents, you have this interview with the bishop, like baptism, baptism, baptism. And I remember laying in bed one night, or just like after all these conversations about baptism, the number one thing that gets hit home is like, you can sin now. You can be imperfect. You can be less than you currently are now. And little babies are perfect. 7-year-olds are perfect. But suddenly at 8, like the switch flips, and now you can sin and you can become bad.
And never Mormons won't quite understand this idea of, in Mormonism, the age of accountability. Joseph Smith, our first prophet, just at some arbitrary point said, at 8, you're responsible for your sins. The day before you're 8, you're not responsible for your sins. And so it can be a heavy burden for a kid to feel like all of a sudden my mistakes are counting against me in heaven.
Yeah. And I even asked my mom, is it better to die before you're 8? Because if you die before you're 8, you never sin. Then you go to heaven.
Yeah.
That's the logical solution to the age of accountability. It sounds like it's smarter to die at 7 than to risk becoming 8.
Because Joseph Smith also taught that any kid who dies before they're 8 immediately goes to the celestial kingdom.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So the math works out on that one. Like, I just remember feeling so disappointed that I had to become 8. And I feel like it really impacted me after my baptism to just have to feel like this perceived weight of sin that was suddenly on me, that, if I had been, somewhat rude to my sibling previously, I was fine. I was in the clear. But then suddenly at 8, I have to take the sacrament. And 2, I think the sacrament never quite felt as as cleansing as baptism. Like, we say it's the same as baptism in the church, but for some reason, baptism always in my mind seemed like the true cleansing. And then the sacrament is like, oh, this is like representative, but it just didn't have, at least personally, like, didn't feel, I remember at 8, 9, 10, like, it didn't feel like I was being baptized every week. It felt like I was baptized once and now I'm full of sin.
It's intense.
It is intense. Yeah.
Okay, so So was that a scary memory for you then, or?
Yeah, I think at the time, I think all of these things, when I was experiencing them, it was very difficult to view outside of the realm of just unquestionable reality. I don't think I was maybe mature enough or complex enough in my nuanced thinking to be like, does that make sense? Are 8-year-olds full of sin when 7-year-olds are perfect? I think it was when I experienced all of these things, it was very difficult as a kid to take it as anything else as the literal truth.
Yeah. I'll just because they're so on point, I'll read a couple comments. Thunder Snow writes, my baptism was the worst day of my life. Up to that point, I suddenly felt unworthy because my sister and I had a fight after I got baptized. I definitely got that logic. Better to die. So that, and then somebody else, Daisy May, writes, no 8-year-old should have the burden of that decision. It's horrifying. And there's probably a whole bunch of Mormons who just think, what a beautiful thing, getting baptized. You're a kid. It's sweet. But it's not always experienced that way by all the people. So thanks for talking about that.
Yeah.
So where does your Mormon story go from baptism?
I think as I aged into being a teenager, I think the theme of my childhood and adolescence is trying to push down any urge or any personality trait or anything about me that felt not Mormon enough. I think if I felt like I was being a good Mormon, I felt really good about myself. And if I felt like I was not being a good Mormon, I felt really bad. And so I have so many stories to kind of illustrate this point. But one that I write about in the book is in my biology class, we were learning about Darwin, evolution, and I thought it was so fascinating. And I checked out a book. I checked out The Origin of Species, and I took it home and I was reading it and trying to understand it. This was, I think, 10th grade. And I went to church for a Wednesday activity, a youth activity. We were playing basketball, and a kid got out, and I made a joke about natural selection, like, oh, you're not, you've been naturally selected out of the basketball. I don't know. It's a dumb joke, but a member of the bishopric called me to the side and had me go in the hallway and said, I can't believe you are bringing the theory of evolution into the church, and that you're talking about that topic or the idea that Adam and Eve, didn't exist in this church building. And his face got all red and he got all flustered, and I felt so embarrassed, almost like I don't think when I learned about evolution, I was even really tracking that evolution was not necessarily something that contradicted the Adam and Eve creation story. I just was in a science class. And the next day I took the book back. I was like, okay, science is not for me. I want to be a good Mormon. I want to really, truly believe as fervently as I can, because that's how I'll know I'm a good person. And so that's one example of, having something arise that I'm interested in or passionate about, only to discover that that's not compatible with Mormon belief. And so I have to throw it in the trash can. And I'm going to throw it in the trash can, not because it's a bad idea, but purely because I've had someone model to me that this is not a Mormon principle, and so it shouldn't play a part in my life at all.
Those of us old enough will remember Bruce R. McConkie, Mormon apostle Bruce R. McConkie, giving a talk called The 7 Deadly Heresies, and evolution was one of the 7 deadly heresies. So there was a time, even though BYU's taught evolution forever, where just you would never bring it up, so I'm sorry that happened.
Oh, well, it's okay.
I mean, one thing that's occurring to me with your story and as you're talking is this idea that you've brought up around baptism. At a very young age, you becoming very aware how quickly you move from pure to impure, like how little it takes, right?
Yeah.
And even in this conversation where you're in the moment and you're playing and you bring up natural selection and how serious it all is, you know, just how little it takes to be viewed as a threat, to be outside, to be viewed as impure, to not be good, like to all those things. Was some of that hypersensitivity, I guess what I'm asking is, from your baptism, did that stay with you? Did that piece of you that was like, wow, it's so easy to all of a sudden be sinful? Like, I fight with my sister. I want, something that's not selfless, or I say a comment about natural selection. Did it create in you sort of a perfectionism, this really hypervigilant state of, I must be ideal. I must be.
Yeah, I think it really did. And the church doctrine is so, I remember on my mission, jumping ahead a tiny bit, there was this quote about how, like, because you're supposed to wake up at 6:30, that if you wake up at 6:30, that's exact obedience. And exact obedience brings miracles. And that if you wake up at 6:31, that the person the Lord was going to deliver to you to be baptized that day will no longer be delivered to you because you were disobedient. And so it truly is like my salvation is hanging on a thread all the time. Not just on my mission, but like in every step you take as a Mormon, in every thought, God is in your mind. You never exist outside of this like razor blade of morality, black and white.
It's like everything is serious.
Yeah.
Everything matters.
Everyth's almost deadly.
Everything,
I mean?
yes.
Yeah. And as someone who has had pretty significant anxiety and depression, it's a firestorm for someone who
I think you just censored. You moderated that comment, right?
a little bit, yeah. So I think those triggering events would make me feel so like back in the box. Like I was willing, my whole Mormon experience, I was willing to do whatever it took to be the good Mormon, because I truly believed that is how I could know I was a good person, was being on the straight, they literally call it the straight and narrow. Like that's what we're describing. So
how did the church's messages around modesty and your job in terms of policing or supporting righteous thoughts from the boys, how did that proceed for you?
I think that women have their own vast set of problems to deconstruct and think about and reconfigure in leaving the church. And for me, a big one is just my body. The way that Mormonism owns your body, especially as a woman. I think when I was also in high school, we had the bishop come in and give a lesson about modesty, and he talked about how if a girl, and he how the bishop looks at every single person in the room. That seems like something a lot of male leaders in the church would do. They like really give you the eyes.
The penetrating glance.
Yeah.
Kind of it's like I can see through your soul.
Like they're trying to, I don't know what they're trying to do, but it worked. But he said that when girls show even a little bit too much skin, that men and boys, because he was, I think, talking about the young men, picture them naked. And as a kid, because I was still a kid, a teenager is still a kid. As a 13-year-old, I just remember trying so hard, like sitting on my hands, because every part of me was like wanting to like reach up to my clothes and like make sure that they were covering me and pull my skirt down, and just feeling like, but where's the boundary? How much skin is it? Because there's a boundary for everything. So if my skirt's here, if my skirt's here, if my skirt's here, when's the boundary where suddenly they see you naked? Like
in their brain. Yeah.
And trying to, just as I had so many times before, trying to find, okay, so tell me the rule. I want the rule, because I want to be safe and I want to feel like I'm being a good Mormon. And so it's so crazy to look back on that and realize that that's just such a creepy, reprehensible thing for this older man to be saying to a group full of teenagers, while the two female leaders in the room are just, everything's, like those women didn't step in and say, hey, that's creepy and body shaming, and let's not sexualize the bodies of 13-year-olds. But they said, yeah, that's probably true. That is how men think. And I feel like so much of Mormonism, like those types of experiences, because that's not the only type of experience I had like that, really trained me to despise my body, because purely by having a female body, you're sinning because you're a woman. Because you exist in the female form, you have the ability to make it so that men no longer have agency. Like, that's what he was describing.
In essence, you're damning them by existing.
Protect the priesthood by dressing correctly is saying men don't have free agency when it comes to policing their own thoughts. That's your responsibility. And that to me was, and that message gets played out so many times. And, even women saying it to other women policing each other's clothing, men policing women's clothing. It's the repeated value of Mormonism is just that a woman's body, if in the wrong context, becomes one of the most immoral things on the planet. And if that's the case, then in my body in the wrong context is the most immoral thing on the planet. It feels so easy to just feel like, well, that must be true for me then. If I show too much skin, I've caused this person to commit an egregious sin, and that was because of me. Yeah,
you mentioned your outline, just sort of coming of age, and your when your period came and then you lost it. Do you want to tell that story?
Yeah, I just finished reading the Jeanette McCurdy book, I'm Glad My Mom Died. And she has an eating disorder. Spoilers coming. And she makes herself so skinny, and her mom teaches her how to have an eating disorder, how to calorie restrict. And the premise of it is that Jeanette is starting to get older. She's starting to hit puberty, and she says, like, I don't want boobs. I want to be skinny. I want to be a tiny child again. And her mom's like, well, here's how you do that. You calorie restrict. And so when I was a freshman in high school, I ran a lot. I was in the cross-country team. And I think just reading her book, I had a very similar experience where I was running enough that I stopped getting my period for like 6 months, a year, a long time. And I was really glad, because it felt like this burden had been lifted off of me, because I just didn't want puberty. I wanted to be this like 7-year-old. I wanted to be this like tiny child, because as a child you feel like you're immune from these ideas that your body is a sin, or that your body can be a sin in all these different contexts. And so I think I just always wanted to like have a return to the previous version of myself, where I felt like I was a better version of Mormon me.
Yeah. Can we go back just for a second? Because I think this is important to your story. This moment where I think it was a bishop, right? The bishop that was saying.
I was a member of the bishopric.
A member of the bishopric.
I don't remember which member.
Because I just think it's interesting in going back to our stories, the power of emotion and where we are in development when certain conditioning, let's just say, beliefs meet us, and how when they get rooted. Like sometimes we hear things, I think, throughout growing up, and it's kind of like, yep, I hear it. But it's different when it like lands and usually emotion and kind of where we are vulnerably in development. Sometimes, like I think for many people, like the licked
cupcake.
Yes, or like sometimes that lands in a different way depending on when you receive it. So I'm curious in that moment where this really seems to like take root in you. It plays out for a while. Is that right?
Yeah,
in reading your book, I feel like that's true. Can you speak because I think it's horrific. I think this reality that's painted in a moment about men and then about yourself. Like, will you just take us through what beliefs were born emotionally, what you thought about your body, your sexuality, and what you thought about men in particular? What was born or cemented or rooted in that moment when you were, that kind of played out?
Yeah.
And this is from the book?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what he was describing is that men are predators. Like, he's saying every man you'll ever meet is a predator. Like, he's looking at you and trying to picture you naked. And he's saying too, women will never understand this. Only men do this. Men are wired differently. And so he's actively teaching me, you should never trust men. Ever. Because all of them, if he's saying all men do this, okay, so my dad does this, my future spouse does this, every young men's leader I've ever has does this. That's to say that men do this, to say that men actively attempt to picture young girls naked, is to say that all men are, you should just never trust them. And that's really damaging because women want to have close relationships with their fathers, with their brothers, with their partners, and so if you're taught this from birth, and especially too, like with the whole pornography thing, there's such a strong current of like every man watches pornography. I think Elder Holland was like, you should not just ask if he's watched pornography, but ask when is the last time he watched pornography. And while also saying pornography is the most horrible and damning thing ever, and it rips the soul apart. If you believe all men watch pornography and all men picture women naked and all men are this way,
Are destroying their souls through watching pornography.
yes, then how do you as a young girl growing into being a woman really have the level of ability to trust a man? How can you trust if this is what's taught to you? And so I think that is one thing that really cemented itself in my mind as a young Mormon girl. Like, don't trust men. Men will lie. They might tell you, of course I don't do that. But no, the bishop knew, or the member of the bishopric knew. That's not the case. Men are different. Men are wired differently. And so that's to me so damaging because I think women deserve to have close, intimate relationships with the men in their lives. And if you're told to never trust men for these reasons, how can you have a trusting relationship with them?
And wasn't it kind of, if not said, implied that men can't control themselves? It's not a choice.
Yeah.
It's the way things are.
Yes. And crazy just the whole agency aspect. So much of Mormon doctrine is about free agency. We chose to come to this earth. We chose to have our, we chose to come to the earth. We choose to get baptized. We choose all these things. We choose. And then at this one point in Mormon doctrine, choice no longer exists. Mm-hmm. Now the choice is on the woman to dress correctly. And the man simply exists.
Yeah. And back to your analogy of like that realization of like, that would make men, in a sense, predators. Then it would make you prey.
Yeah.
Right? Like I'm curious about the play out because I do feel like this follows your story a little bit. It comes up in the belief that you had then about you in the world.
Yeah, I think it really made me feel a sense of self-repulsion because if my body will do that to a man, then that means my body is a sin, and that's a sin I can't control because I cannot become disembodied. And I think in my whole childhood, in my adolescence, trying so hard to never sin, but then to still be told, Like, this is, I also talk about in the book, Britney Spears. Why is she bad? She's bad because she's sexy. What about her is sexy? Because she dresses this way and she acts this way. Like, so if I dressed that way, if I acted that way, I would also be bad. I think my mind just so easily went to this idea that the female form, women's bodies, are so hyperactive, or so radioactive, sorry.
Yeah.
Like, so radioactive to men that I don't think you can confidently exist in the female form if you've been told this information.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your intellectual life in your brain as you're in these high school years, and you're trying to be the perfect Mormon, but probably inside you're having lots of different types of thoughts, right? Kind of an extension of the evolution inclination, but maybe in other ways.
Yeah, similarly, I also, my other loves in high school and now were painting and art and reading. And readers like to write, so I guess that's where the book comes from. But I remember reading the Book of Mormon, and many people have said this about the Book of Mormon, that they read it and they're just like, I just am not getting that much from it. Like, it's just... it was so hard to get investigators to read the Book of Mormon. It was so hard for me even to get through the whole Book of Mormon. It's just such a dense, uninteresting, like, and I really wanted to like the Book of Mormon. I wanted to love the Book of Mormon, but I would then go from this experience of kind of working my way through each verse of the Book of Mormon, doing my due diligence, and then I'd go to these other books that I loved, and I would stay up till 2 or 3 in the morning, just like with I was the kid with the flashlight in the bed, like reading the book.
What are some of your favorites from back then?
My favorite was Crime and Punishment.
Tolstoy?
Wow.
Yes. Which I read my senior year of high school. And then I always wanted to read the big books. So I read Anna Karenina. And it's so funny looking back, like Anna Karenina, spoilers ahead, is also about a married woman who falls in love with a younger man, and then things go wrong and she ends up killing herself. And I loved that book. That book was so epic and just morally complex in a way that also, like Les Mis, I have that on my list. I read Les Mis, and like the idea of a girl going into prostitution to feed her child. That is the most complex moral question. Can a woman sell her body if it is to feed her child? And as a Mormon kid, I'm like, should I be reading this? But also it was, the only way I could access, I think, these more complex thoughts was in this classic literature, because I couldn't watch movies about a woman having an affair. I couldn't watch a movie about a girl being a prostitute, but I was always allowed to read classic literature. And Crime and Punishment is about a murder, and the questions of morality surrounding this murder and what he goes through after he chooses to do the murder. And
I was just corrected. I said Tolstoy, but it's Dostoevsky, so I apologize for that.
Tolstoy, yes.
Yeah,
Anna
I said that was me.
So yeah, I think the reason I gravitated towards these books is because I was always allowed to read classic literature, but within classic literature, there are some of the most horrendous, questionable, strange, beautiful moral questions that I couldn't ask or talk about in any other form, not in TV, not in movies, any of that stuff. It would have been on, we'd have to go on Clear Play or something. But there was no Clear Play for Anna Karenina. So I just loved, it was just such a stark difference to me going from reading the Book of Mormon and struggling through it and trying so hard to love it because I knew I was supposed to, and then staying up late to read these dense books that were so complex and interesting to me. And the same with my art. I've always made, it's kind of funny, like pretty psychedelic stuff. Like looking back now, I feel like it's very psychedelic art with weird characters and really strange colors. And when I would show my family or other Mormons my art, they would really want me to be doing like landscapes or portraiture or realism. And people would be kind of put off by my art because it wasn't art in the type of sense you'd go into Deseret book and you see the picture of Joseph Smith and he's, at having the first vision. And now I show my art to people who were never Mormon and they love it and they think it's really cool. But I think I could never have that type of art appreciated within a Mormon community because Mormonism wants the George Washington praying by his horse type of art. And so so that was another disconnect, like feeling like these parts of myself are wrong and I can't even say why a painting is wrong, but I can tell it is. And I can tell that there's other art that is the right kind of Mormon art and the right kind of Mormon images. So just other examples of, as a kid, having like this, I feel like, very vibrant personality like bubbling underneath and trying to suppress it whenever I got wind of like, that's not Mormon. You need to be more Mormon. And I really regret not leaning into that part of myself because I think, maybe I wouldn't be writing a book about leaving the Mormon Church. Maybe I'd be writing the great next American novel. But maybe I still will, you never know. But I just think like I shut down so many paths and opportunities and dreams for myself in the name of trying to just be a really good Mormon. And that fills me with a lot of regret because I think I gave up. It wasn't even I gave up a dream. It was like I never even allowed myself to dream to begin with.
Yeah.
What's that line on Little Women? You could have been a lawyer or a doctor. What was the line, Margie?
It's like I could have been a great many things.
Yeah.
Mr. Whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So you're in high school, but then you decide to homeschool? Is that?
Yeah. So I had a really funny looking back, stressful and awful at the time, but I fell in with a group of kids from my art class who were less than desirable because they swore and skipped school, which is very normal for,
as it turns out,
turns
very
out
developmentally.
Lots of kids do that. But at the time, my mom got really concerned that I was hanging out with the wrong crowd of kids. And I made a MySpace, but I made it so I made it at a friend's house because she told us we weren't allowed to have MySpaces. And one day I skipped a single period of class and I sat in the library with two of my friends. And it wasn't like we didn't even go in the back and smoke a cigarette. We were sitting in the library talking, but
it's a slippery slope, Alyssa.
It's a very slippery slope. But they made the report. You missed a class. I got called in. They called my mom and my parents. And my mom was like, I don't like who you're falling in with. I don't think these friends are good for you. And I really became so guilty about it that I asked to be homeschooled so that I wouldn't have to see these friends again, but also so that I could just exist in this, what I'm always looking for is like to go back. I just want to exist in this state of having no temptations, no opportunities to choose something wrong. I just want to be insulated from sin. And so I was homeschooled for a year. After I went back to school, I got some better friends. And I just became the type of kid that's always giving out copies of the Book of Mormon. And I invited tons of friends to stake dances. And I think my family always looks back at that time as like my rebellious time, which is so funny because all I did was skip a single period of class and I made a MySpace. But to me at the time, it just felt like I have done an unpardonable sin and I will be making recompense for this for the rest of my life because of the black and white, I think, because it's just so easy to slip off the slippery slope and it's sad to me too that these kids that I was friends with who swore sometimes and skipped school were like the devil. They were kids. Those are also just children. Those are kids. But in my Mormon mind, they became demonized because they were leading me down this horrible path. So yeah, that kind of brings me into
Real quick, did you date in high school? Or did you ever experience any sort of Mormon law of chastity kind of guilt pre-mission?
No, I really was I dated some. I didn't date anyone very seriously though. I really was pretty like very Mormon when it came to that. Like, don't pair off. I went on a lot of group dates, but I didn't really date anyone super seriously before my mission.
Okay.
Did you feel like there was a barrier still, let's say at 16 and 17, kind of around where you had a distrust of boys your age? Is that part of it, or was it that you were busy, or, do you remember your frame of reference in dating, if you had still remnants of some of that, or if it was just more about like, I was busy. I was,
Yeah, I had one guy that I dated, and I still wouldn't say that it was that serious, but I would, that was like the closest thing maybe to having a boyfriend in high school. And it was kind of the same thing where I felt like wanting to just have a vast amount of distance and feeling safer, making it, more of like a friendship kind of thing, and always feeling like he, wanted to like do the kissing and stuff, and I like don't. Yeah. And I think I was really set up for failure in that regard, because I think I had just had so much messaging surrounding like men and boys being this way that it's easier to just be like, well, I guess I won't mess with this. I won't deal with this. Versus, trying to have a crush or go and pair off or whatever.
Yeah, I do think sometimes when you accept portrayals of men as being this kind of almost hypersexual being, then it can have the effect on women, you can tell me if this is true, but of like wanting to desexualize yourself. It's like, well, if you're holding it then like not a hint, nary a hint of sexuality over here.
Yeah,
like,
I was definitely like that.
Not responsible for anything you're feeling. Or did you feel like that? And then there's this huge disconnect to your own body, to your own experience, to your own desire.
Yeah, I think it was much easier to just be like, I'm just going to disassociate from that aspect of life than try to confront the difficulty of like having some sort of relationship with someone that secretly is picturing me naked and only wants to have sex with me and has no interest at all in anything I have to say, but has one thing on his mind. Why step into something like that when your only goal in life is to be a really good Mormon kid? That's how I felt.
I'm curious about your experience in high school about learning. Like, did you find that you loved learning, that you appreciated kind of the experience of school? How was your identity then? Or were you more like prone to like, I don't know. How would you express your identity in high school with regard to school and running and all the things? And did perfectionism or optimization kind of enter into the equation there too?
Yeah, I definitely, I was a very good student. My parents really had that as a principle, was having good grades, being a good student. I did so many times hear the idea that a woman only needs a degree if her husband dies. And so that was a difficult and just a challenging aspect of the messaging around schooling that I was always trying to understand or piece together is school is really important. You should get good grades, but also you only need to make babies and you'll only need to use your brain if your husband dies. So do I need, how do those two ideas push, how do they fit together? I don't know. But I felt like I really loved learning. Like I said, I loved my biology and science classes. I loved my English classes. I was always a really good student, but it did feel like this, what's the point though, if I'm hearing that ultimately my wedding day is the most important day of my life, not the day I'll get my PhD, and defend my thesis or something.
Yeah.
So did you have career ambitions bubbling up by the time you were a senior that you had to beat down because they didn't fit with the Mormon dream?
Yeah, my senior year, I was really trying to decide what I would major in college, and I had a lot of ideas. I thought about trying to get into a painting or fine arts program. Writing was always a big thing, photography. So I had, like a lot of high school seniors, I was like, well, what should I do? And my dad would always give us a blessing at the beginning of each school year.
Father's blessing.
Father's blessing.
Yeah.
And so we all gather together, everyone sits in the room, he puts his hands on my head, he starts the blessing, and in the blessing he says that I am meant to be an English teacher, and that will be my calling, that will be my career, that's what I should do with my life, is to be an English teacher. And I was like, oh, well, that's easy. I don't have to think anymore. I don't have to question. I don't have to self-reflect. I already know what I should major in. So I very quickly and easily threw the rest of the ideas in the trash can. I declared my major before I even arrived. And my first year of BYU, all 4 years, I was on the track. I didn't deviate at all. Because I viewed that as a very serious edict from God, like a commandment. This is what you're going to do. And so don't question.
My Mormon brain is like, oh, how beautiful. Those father's blessings are so sweet. And he's a loving dad that takes you aside and gives you a blessing. And wow, he gets inspiration for you because he knows you so well. That's my Mormon brain. My now brain is like, that's almost abuse. You don't tell someone what their career is going to be. Even if you have the best intentions, that's
in the name of God. I mean,
and say that it's God that's telling him to do it. Exactly.
Because I fully believed 100% that blessings were the word of God, because that's the doctrine, that when words are exiting a man's mouth, when his hands are placed on your head, that's God. That is not your dad. And so it's, if you get something in your patriarchal blessing, something in a blessing you're given from healing, any blessing, people will take notes during blessings. People will have someone writing the script out because they believe it's so sacred and important. And it's not like I'm taking notes when my dad's talking to me all the time, but when he's giving me a blessing, I am taking those things very, very seriously.
Yeah.
Words of God.
Yeah, so you knew what lane to stay in, thanks to your dad, right?
Yeah, well, and I do feel like he was. I don't.
He had good intentions.
I don't resent him for it.
Yeah.
Because I love my dad and my mom. They're my parents. I love them. I should make that very clear. I think Mormonism just makes you play the parts that you're meant to play. And so I don't think that in giving a father's blessing, my dad was, not that you're saying he was, but I think he was feeling like this is the best thing a Mormon father can do for his Mormon daughter, is to give this blessing and to say what I feel inspired to say. And who knows? My guess is that during that week, I had said several times, I'll be an English teacher. And so because he heard me say that, he was like, okay, I'll put it in your blessing. And that's that. And maybe the week before I had been saying I'd be an artist. And if we did the blessing in that week, maybe I'd be an artist, you know.
I don't think so, because I think being an artist scares
That's true.
Mormon
That's
parents,
not a very,
I think.
an English teacher is the most mom type of career path imaginable. So you're not wrong.
Yeah. Okay, so there's always that choice of college or mission or no mission or all that, right?
Yeah. So when I turned 19, they hadn't changed the age yet. So I went to college. I served my mission when I was 21. I was 20. So the age change worked for me just a little bit, because it was 21 and they changed it to 19 and I was 20 when I left. So I went to BYU for a few years, and
Wait, so you went during that big change time?
yeah, I was at BYU when the wave happened.
Monson was president.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was in my BYU dorm
You're
during
20, yeah.
during that big announcement
Oh,
about the
wow.
age change, and you could like hear girls like crying in the apartment above us, and people were on the street
Really?
being like, "They changed the age," and it was like a mania. I think it really
Wow.
became kind of like this. Who can proclaim the fastest they're going to go serve a mission? And then all these guys started being like, I'll only date a girl who's a returned missionary. And it just changed the whole culture of BYU. So just overnight, it was kind of funny. But
What
yeah.
year was that about?
Say it
What
again?
year was that about?
I don't know.
15-ish?
Pre-15. I really want
Okay.
to say 2013 or
Okay.
14.
Yeah.
I'd have to look it up.
Okay.
So yeah, I went to BYU for a few years, and then they changed the age, and I actually wasn't permitted to go on a mission when I wanted, because I had mental health concerns, and my bishop said I had to have a counselor sign off before I could serve, and that was really hard on me, because that felt like being punished for having depression, because it kind of is, but it's because the church doesn't want the liability of having a depressive missionary, I guess. So they just say you have to have a doctor sign off. But I was really frustrated that they wouldn't let me go. And so that I was going to my therapist, I was seeing her, and this kind of hits my first big moment where I started to question God, because it was so hard on me to have to wait to serve a mission, especially with this mania of all these girls serving. I was like, I want to serve too. And I remember I was sitting in the temple, the Provo temple, doing baptisms for the dead, because I would go every week, as all the best Mormons do at BYU. And as I was sitting there, I just had this very strong feeling. I wasn't even praying about my mission at all, but I had this really strong feeling that I was going to serve my mission in Italy. And it just hit me like a ton of bricks. Like from left field, I just had this like really strong feeling, I'm going to serve my mission in Italy.
And it had to have been your art brain. It's like Florence and Leonardo da Vinci and like,
Yeah,
you know,
I mean,
the
I don't
David
know.
is
Many
there.
people are dreaming of serving in Wisconsin. Sorry, Wisconsinites. But yeah, so I started to cry. I was like, God, and I remember being like, God is blessing me, because he's blessing me with this knowledge, because I'm waiting, and I'm waiting till my bishop says I can go on my mission. So he's blessing me with this knowledge, because the Lord loves me so much that he's basically like preordaining me with this beautiful information as a blessing for waiting for my depression to go away.
It's like, hang on.
Yeah,
hang
yeah,
on.
just
This
hang
is
on,
waiting for
Alyssa.
you.
And I went home and I wrote in my journal, I know I will serve my mission in Italy. And I know I will serve my mission in Italy as sure as I know that there is a God.
Wow.
Because it was the same feeling. It was that spiritual bubbling up feeling, the burning in the bosom that I had used to know truth my whole life. And I just felt like the Lord really blessed me. And it's so funny, because when I tell the story to people, they're like, God wouldn't give you that information. I'm like, I really felt like he did. Sorry.
Maybe missing the point.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Well, so I finally get cleared to serve my mission, and I put in my papers, and I wanted to open my mission call up on Y Mountain. And so I hiked up the mountain, because in the Bible it talks a lot about going up on the mount for a spiritual, having communion. So I wanted to make it very special because I'd been waiting for it so long. And I opened the envelope and did the thing where you put the letter, hide so you can't check and see where you're going. And I edged it down.
What's that about? Why do they cover up where you're
so
getting
that you
sent?
can't jump ahead and cheat and look where you're going.
Because the first sentences are God's words, and you don't want to skip over them.
There's an optimal way, an optimization even to reading your letter.
So you're supposed to go and use the envelope.
Where do you learn that, though?
BYU, I guess. I'd been to so many missions. I mean, all the girls, all my friends you just see it. They have their mission call, and they do this, and then they read line by line.
Oh my!
If you watch,
Wow.
if you go after this and watch a YouTube video of a missionary opening call, they'll do it. So I began reading line by line, and just I'm like, man, I already know what this is gonna say. This is pointless.
Here it comes.
Italy it's just gonna appear before me. God already told me, and I read Denver, Colorado. And I just remember almost I just put it down, and they looked around is the manager here? I got to talk to someone about this. I think they sent me the wrong letter. I'm not supposed to go to Colorado. And I felt like I had been punched in the stomach, because the way that I was so sure, I would have bet all the money I'd ever made in my entire life that I was going to go to Italy, because that's how strong my testimony was. That's how strongly I believed that this was revelation. So I walk down the mountain, and as I'm walking, I just start being I was probably wrong. I guess it wasn't revelation. I must have misinterpreted. God didn't tell me anything. The brethren that sent me this letter, they are the ones that know. I don't know. And by the time I got down from my hike, I was Italy was off in the distance. I stopped thinking about it. And I served my whole 1.5 year mission in Denver, Colorado.
Really quickly, Julia wrote, I hope she gets to go to Italy someday. Have you been to Italy?
I have been to Italy.
Okay, good.
I know. Some people too have said well, maybe. I've had active members be you might go there on your senior mission.
A different mission, yeah. Really quickly, I know that this is kind of obvious to many, but as soon as you've had that undeniable spiritual experience that proves out to be completely wrong, the church, you can readjust your expectations and downplay that, but there's a lingering impact. Can you just tell us what that is?
Yeah, over my entire mission, I just could never shake that feeling. I could never shake that experience of being so sure that it was as sure as I had felt about Joseph Smith and the Book of Mormon. And almost as a Mormon, I think you're so sure about something that it feels like a way of showing faith. Instead of saying, I believe the church is true, you say, I know the church is true. That saying things with this absolute cadence or tone, or just approaching a belief with saying I know versus I think or I believe or I hope, is true faith, is knowing God, is knowing where you're going to serve your mission. And so I was hesitant to walk back this spiritual experience, because I was I know I'm serving my mission in Italy because that's what the Spirit told me. So my whole mission, and still to this day, it's an impossible experience to forget about and sweep under the rug.
I was also just going to say that on a mission and in your life as a Mormon, you're taught to listen to the Holy Ghost and to follow the promptings of the Holy Ghost. But at that point, you would have almost had Holy Ghost trauma. Am I right?
Yeah.
Fill in those dots for us,
Yeah, I think that Mormonism teaches you that you can use the Holy Ghost to know objective truth. science, the space, Joseph Smith said there's Quakers on the moon, like that you can use this gut feeling to know absolute truth. And that is why, even if there's issues with the Book of Mormon, even if there's issues with Joseph Smith's polygamy, that I think anytime I encountered any sort of history that was counter to my understanding of Mormonism, the power of the Holy Ghost that I had experienced wiped it away because it was an absolute feeling. And so that was a time that I had to face this idea of having thought I knew truth using a gut feeling, and then having that feeling objectively proved wrong by my real life events.
Yeah, it's like an epistemological meltdown, because how do you ever trust the, quote, Holy Ghost again when it deceived you so thoroughly?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Right? Is that right or not?
Yeah.
I'm not trying to inject that.
And there's the three major moments like that I'll share, and I have in my outline, that thing happened 2 other times in my life in such a significant way that by the third time, I had to start asking, maybe it's not God teaching me objective truth about my life. Mm-hmm. Maybe my gut feeling isn't a good way to make major life choices or no truth.
Maybe feelings aren't truth.
Yeah.
But the Mormon conditioning too, I feel like always offers you that alternate path, even in a situation like that, do you find? Because if it's sort of like, oh, I had this moment and I'm supposed to go to Tuscany or to go to Italy, right? That it would be like, okay, well, God doesn't lie. The Holy Ghost is infallible. So what did I do? So maybe I wasn't righteous enough, or and so there's always like some loophole.
Yeah.
Where it leads back
it's like
to
that,
kind of
that talk that was like, there's 2 paths, and you can, it's a story of a man and his son, and the man and the son are at a bridge or a fork in the road, and they choose one way, and it turns out to be the wrong way. And they had prayed, I think, to know which way should we go. And so the little boy is like, Daddy, why did the Holy Ghost lead us the wrong way? And the dad says, sometimes the Lord leads us the wrong way so that we know what the right way is.
Right.
That was in a conference talk.
Yes.
And so that is another logical loophole, that no matter what, God is always omnipotent. Even if he leads you down the most idiotic path, it was to teach you that the other path was right. And so there's no way to logically loop your way out of this cycle of belief, like the idea of someday you'll serve your senior mission in Italy. Well, he was just trying to teach you. He was testing you.
That's right.
All of these things we say to cast away the doubts that come when these experiences happen to us.
Exactly.
So one important experience that every Mormon missionary goes on is going through the temple before they serve their missions. So do you want to talk about your temple experience?
Yes.
Is that noteworthy? Was that noteworthy?
Yeah, I think I hated the temple.
What? You're not allowed to say that.
Shocker. I know.
That's never been said on Mormon Stories ever, except by every person I've ever interviewed. 99%. Anyway.
It was so, I think my biggest word to use to describe the temple is betrayed, because I felt like looking at my dad, looking at my mom, and just seeing their expressions, I almost was looking at them to see, like, maybe this is weird to them too, like unique, even strange, odd, but they just had this expression that was like, this is the most normal thing we've ever done in our entire lives.
Are you willing to just name some of the hardest or weirdest things, just so that people who've never been to the temple will know what was hardest for you?
Yeah, so you go in and you sit on either side, and you're wearing a white dress, which felt fairly normal. It's just a white dress, and then they at least when I went through, they showed you a film. It's about Adam and Eve. That, nothing new there. But then they start having you wear different clothing, the white robes, the green apron. You can Google the pictures, and as they're kind of as we were going through this unwinding of my experience, it just felt like an unwinding. Like I felt like I was falling apart as this endowment is happening, as each handshake, as each new piece of clothing. And then you go up to the prayer circle and you have to do the patriarchal grip and put your arm next, on the person's shoulder next to you. And at least when I went through, when it was their first time going through, you had to go into the prayer circle. And I just was standing there and, oh God, hear the words of my mouth. And I felt too betrayed because it felt insidious to me that this ceremony was tied to my ability to serve a mission. And I knew for some of my friends tied to their ability to get married in the temple, and that they encourage you to do it as close to the event as possible. Because in my opinion, they know that if you balk and say, this is not for me, you're also saying, I can't go on a mission. I can't get married in the temple. And so they pair this awful tradition, awful ceremony with this major life event that people are flying out for, I had already put off school for, and you're about to be whisked away into marriage, into a mission, without truly having the opportunity to understand what just happened to you. And I felt like I didn't have the opportunity to process. And it felt like by design, I didn't have the opportunity to process because they want to send you onto the mission as fast as you can so that you can't be like, wait, this is my church? I need a minute to think about this and decide if I consent to having this be my new lived reality.
Because before the temple, you didn't know this was your church, right?
No, not at all. I even had some friends try to show me videos and I'd be like, I don't want to see it. I was like, I have to wait till I'm spiritually prepared till I can go myself. That's offensive. And when I came home and I took a shower, I got out, and that was the moment where I'm supposed to start wearing my garments. And I just stared at those two pink little baggies and wanted to cry. I don't remember if I did, but I was like, if I could feel like if I put these on right now, I'm committing that this is okay. I am saying this is okay with me.
You're consenting.
I'm consenting. If I take this step, if I just rip the bags open and put it on my body and go out of this door, this is the crossroads of if I choose to live this or if I choose to say, what the fuck was that? I do not want to have this in my life. I'm not okay with this.
Yeah.
It was weird. I didn't feel the spirit. I didn't want to ever do it again. I don't want to wear garments. I want to wear normal underwear. But instead, I just sat there for a while and I as it's so easy to do as a member, I just said, I know I felt the spirit before about Joseph Smith. I know the Book of Mormon is the word of God because I felt really good about it in the past. And I opened those bags, I put on my garments and wore them for the next 4 years. And that's so wild to me that I think everyone probably has that moment where they have the garments and they, this is the moment. Now this is my new underwear. And they have to be like, am I okay with this? And they say yes. I think most people say yes because they're like, I'm going to go get married in the temple or I'm serving a mission.
And did you go while they were still veiling their faces?
Yeah,
The women were still veiling their faces?
I left after they made that change that they don't. Yeah.
Left
so
the church.
my whole experience was always the veiling of the faces.
And did you covenant to your husband?
Yes.
While he covenanted with God?
Yes.
And do you remember that discrepancy?
I hated that. Oh my gosh.
So until internet ex-Mormons sort of embarrassed the church, the Mormon temple ceremony, the man, in a married couple, the man would covenant in the temple to obey God, and the woman would covenant to the husband to hearken to the husband, and would not covenant with God.
Yes, and the temple film was, to me, one of the most offensive, the smallest but still most offensive gestures was in the temple film where Adam is looking at God and he's covenanting with God. And then Eve is also looking at God, silently watching. And then God stops talking, Adam stops talking. And then Eve stops looking at God and just turns ever so slightly to look at her husband and then to covenant with him. And I was like, even before God, a woman has to turn to her husband. Men get to commune with the most powerful being in the universe, and women turn and quietly look at their husbands and wonder what they should be doing. And covenant, it just,
They look at a mortal.
yeah. And that was so offensive to me that's why they changed it. That's why they make these changes. It's so insulting that they make these changes and people are like, they don't do that anymore in the temple. Why not? Because it was offensive, because people complained. Why are we changing this eternal ceremony? Because of people complaining. If it's eternal, why are we changing the doctrine? It's almost like it's not eternal. It's almost like it's not doctrine. It's almost like it's just to keep the people happy.
Yeah, because my progressive Mormon brain that's still in there is like, oh, good, the church is making a positive step. They're becoming less sexist, less misogynistic. But then my Orthodox Mormon brain is like, then why did we all have to go through that for decades, if not 100 plus years?
It's like the polygamy question. We don't I think the verbiage of we don't practice polygamy. Oh, but you still believe polygamy, right? And the idea that, well, because we don't practice it anymore, it doesn't matter that all those girls had to be married to 50, 60, 70-year-old men at 12, 13, 14. This idea that we've made a change, and so we don't need to apologize, we don't need to make recompense, we don't need to fix the damage we've done to Black people being kept from saving ordinances, to women experiencing these sexist parts of the church, to women not receiving the priesthood, all of these different things. Like, Mormons almost are like, oh, they made the change, it's fine now. Any suffering faced by any people previous to me matters not at all. That is so hurtful and so insulting, because it's erasure. They just erase it. It's like by making the change, they erase that it ever existed. And that to me is so offensive and so damaging.
Something I don't know, Margie, you and I have ever processed is once we went to the temple, you pretty much never went back. And in my mind, I'm like, hey, Mark, you want to go to the temple? You're like, not really. And I'm just like, okay. And in my mind, I don't know if I was just like, well, I hope she's okay. I guess I'll be extra righteous. But you just never liked it. And this is back in 93. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. We never really processed that. I think I was probably afraid to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you remember feeling those things, that Alyssa?
Yeah. And I relate a lot to Alyssa's experience that way. I think, too, one thing for just people that didn't grow up Mormon is this idea, too, that like through young women, it's like years and years and years of talk about the temple as like heaven on earth, pinnacle experience. All part of it, too, is just, yes, it's disturbing in its own right. And it also is like how built up it is, how like the divinity, the whole sort of, particularly for young women. I don't know for young men if it's talked about that way, but for young women, it's like in young women, you never get really past the temple. I don't know what's supposed to happen to a woman other than having babies, because really the temple is it. That's all we cover. That's all we've got.
And that women tell their husbands their new name, but husbands and men never tell anyone. Only God knows. It's the same dynamic. Women tell men, men tell God. That little graph plays out so many times, and it is offensive and hurtful and so damaging to just have this reality that I will never commune directly with God in at least an organizational sense in the temple. I'm always either looking forward to being married, and then once I'm married, I am focused on my priesthood holder as my guiding star in this world. And at the temple, I really did hate that. And it felt like it was really insult to injury on top of everything else that happens in the temple.
Yeah.
And you talk about that moment where you like put your garments on for the first time and walk out of the room and there's no going back. I had that similar moment just with my testimony where I was like, I never got the witness that the church was true, but now I'm in Guatemala and I've got to go teach the discussion. Can I say I know it's true? I guess I'll just say I know it's true and maybe I'll gain the... So like there's this moment, there are these moments where you're ignoring yourself, your 8-year-old self, your high school self, the evolution self, the maybe I should be an artist self, maybe this temple experience is awful self. And what do you do each time as a Mormon? What do you do?
Yeah, you just keep pushing it down. And it's like, I think also Jeffrey R. Holland, apparently he lives rent-free in my head, where he says, what's the quote? Where he says, how he always had that like voice. You're like, and if you don't have a testimony, then lean on mine. And like... He, I think that was the same talk where he's like, to refute the Book of Mormon, they have to go, or leave the church, they have to go under the Book of Mormon, over the Book of Mormon, or around the Book of Mormon. You cannot go through the Book of Mormon.
I think he said crawl.
Crawl, yeah,
right?
Crawl your way. And it's almost like he's like, if I can just speak in the most absolutist terms possible, I will capture the minds of all these people. If I just say, if you don't have a testimony, it's actually fine for you to serve a mission because... I have a testimony. And if I have a testimony as the one apostle that's speaking in this conference talk, then the rest of you don't even need confirmation. You just have to listen to me. That is such a disgusting use of power.
Because you're going to be paying 10% of your income for the rest of your life to the church that he leads, right? And
it's rather
and
convenient.
Obeying his teachings. And so it is an abuse of power.
Yeah.
Because he's basically saying, give your life to us.
Give your life to us. And you don't if you're not sure if you should give your life to us, that's okay because I'm sure.
I'm sure you should give your life to me.
I'm sure enough for the both of us.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So you just pack that all down and serve your mission. Were there any mission stories I think you had in your outline, maybe one or two?
Yeah. I think on my mission, I mentioned the 630 versus 631 rule, how that's the boundary between life and death, sin and good. And and a potential investigator's salvation or not, right? Yeah,
like you waking up at 631 could keep that dude
person
that you
from
were supposed to go
receiving the
visit
gospel.
from hearing the gospel. So that's on you too.
And I have written in my white handbook very clearly, obedience brings blessings, exact obedience brings miracles. And the missionary handbook is a lot of pages. I know they changed it, but for me, I had the older one, and you have to read 3 pages a day. And mine has copious notes, and then that's just the baseline handbook because then your mission has lots of rules too. And so it becomes this hyper fixation, I think, for so many missionaries to memorize these rules, to police other missionaries on the rules. There's so many tiny random little rules. Like there's a rule in my handbook, I don't know if it's still in the new handbook, that you're supposed to keep change to give to thieves. And all the missionaries would keep change to give to thieves, just in case. So that if thieves were robbing them, they could give them some money, and then the robbers would leave. And I think it actually uses that wording, like keep spare change to give to thieves, or I'll have to look it up. But
the thing is that in places like Brazil, people will come up and stick a gun in the missionary's chest and say, give me your money. So, I mean, I think it's a way to keep you safe.
It didn't happen in Denver, Colorado, though. But it's just an example of an illustration of a rule that even if some of the rules didn't feel that personally applicable, people would still go bend over backwards to follow the rule.
Yeah.
We had another rule is you can only be in dinner or lunch or breakfast for an hour. So the members would feed us, and you're supposed to have dinner and a lesson in that hour. And if you stay for longer than 1 hour for dinner and a lesson, that's disobedience. And the I don't know if every mission has this, but we called it diso. That was the slang term. You're being diso.
Disobedient?
Yeah.
Okay.
Missionaries have so many strange little slang words. And so I would get so much anxiety because if we went to a house with lots of kids, the mom's cooking the dinner, I'm looking at my clock, it's 45 minutes in, she's not done with dinner yet. And sometimes we would say we have an appointment. Like sometimes we would stay because we'd feel guilty to leave, but sometimes we'd say we have an appointment we have to get to, we have to leave, and we'd just leave without dinner, or we'd leave without the message, or we would just leave at the hour mark. Regardless.
Or even if you ate for 5 minutes, I gotta run. The rule says I gotta go.
And I hope they've changed that, just for the missionary's sake, because there's all of these tiny rules create this just massive amount of data to keep in your brain which is, it's not even like it's a job. You're not even employed by the church, but you're
paying to go.
You're paying to go, but you're constrained in the prison of your own mind by these rules.
Yeah.
Nobody is, when I've posted videos about my mission, people are like, well, who's checking up on you? Like, no, there's God. That's all. But it's pretty good at checking up on you. And so I felt like I got hyper kind of an OCD level of obsession about the rules on my mission, because it was always phrased as, if you break these rules, you are keeping someone from salvation.
Yeah.
God will not give you investigators if you're breaking even the tiniest little rule. So I really hated that kind of prison of my own mind of trying to, a full-time mission is you don't even have any days off. You're supposed to even proselyte on P Day. It says in the handbook to proselyte on P Day. So we would proselyte on P Day. So even on your day off, you're still teaching the gospel. So you're never off. And I also, in my mission, I lived with members the whole time. So I never had my own apartment. I always had to be in a small room in a member's home. And members would create long lists of rules, like, you can only shower for 5 minutes, or
that would be a masturbation rule, right? No, I'm not kidding.
I mean, well, I don't think that they think girls can do that. So
no, but I mean,
probably for the elders, yes.
Well, no, even like Jesse Hildebrandt, we interviewed Jesse Hildebrandt, the niece of Jody Hildebrandt, and Jody would tell her niece
timing the showers,
time in the bathroom, tampons could be used, to self pleasure, like really crazy things. I just don't want people to think I was making that up.
No,
it applies to women and men.
I just never have thought about those rules in that way. I thought they were just not wanting to waste money on the missionaries by having long showers, but it's probably a little bit of both.
Yeah.
Or this idea too of just kind of hyper discipline, getting people accustomed to hyper discipline, hyper control over everything. So you become one with,
Yeah. And at that time, my parents were kind of going through a divorce, and that was very hard on me. And
what's that like as a missionary to have your parents getting divorced?
They weren't getting divorced yet. It wasn't until I got home from my mission that it was kind of official, but I just got, as a missionary, you don't really have much information besides the brief emails you get on Mondays. But at the time, I was living with a member couple that would argue all the time, and it was really hard on me because they would yell at each other, and we were just the little missionaries up in the house, like, we have to live here, and you never want to complain as a missionary or make a fuss, but it would just really trigger these memories of my parents fighting growing up, this idea that they're kind of currently going through a divorce. And I confided in my mission president, I am struggling with these people fighting. It's not a good living situation for me, because when they fight, I really feel like I lose focus because it's very stressful for me. My mission president talked to their bishop.
Whoa.
And asked the bishop to bring them in to ask if their marriage was okay. And so they one day come home and sit us down, and they're like, you tattled on us to the mission president, and we got in trouble with our bishop. And they laid into us, me and my companion. And I just remember being like, I have no other place to live but this. Like, I just, you know, I always just have been the type of person that if someone's yelling at me, I'm just like, okay, I'm just going to take it. I have nothing to say in response. And I do think that I don't know if that they moved the missionaries, but we stayed living there till I got transferred out of that area. So it was so awkward after that. And this idea that you have all these rules, you don't have your own space, you don't have your own apartment, you're always being judged by the members with all these rules. They hear you showering, they're timing your showers. It was just, I felt like my whole mission, I never could quite feel free for even a moment. And you're with your companion 24/7.
Right.
That's add that to the list.
I feel like that'll do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also lived on my mission with a hoarder, which was crazy. Because that they approve these living arrangements. There's an older mission couple that goes into the living arrangement and says, yes, they do like at least they check with the eyes. They say, okay, yep, we're okay. The missionaries can live here. But when I would get home with my companion, her whole house was just full of food storage. So like, picture the door, the doorway, two shelves at the door to our bedroom. So like the upstairs was like just lots of magazines, but then once you go down the stairs, it's just like shelving of food all the way to our door. And it's super dirty and dusty food. And like it was all from like 1978 or 1983 or 1962. Like she had been keeping this food and amassing this food for decades. And I lived in a hoarder's house for 6 months because this was after I had complained about the previous couple. And I was like, I'm not complaining again. That did not go well for me. And so that was my last mission area, was living in that person's house. And she just had a mental illness. She was pretty elderly. I think she was just trying to be kind and give the missionaries a place to stay. But like, I don't hold her accountable for other people saying, yes, we certify that missionaries can stay here and that's okay. And so I just had I added to the list of like these experiences from my mission of just feeling like totally out of control of my own destiny or life, and just at the hands of trying to be as good of a missionary as I could be under these conditions of like massive amounts of stress. And I don't know, it was really hard.
Yeah.
But then they tell you missions are supposed to be really hard. So you're like, I'm being perfected by this.
Yeah.
So even if it's hard, you're like, it's supposed to be hard. And if I say it's too hard, I'm not faithful enough.
Yeah.
You're sanctified by the adversity.
Yes.
And holding out maybe for blessings.
Yeah, maybe someday the blessings, or maybe the blessing is just that I learn how to be strong.
Right. Right.
I don't want to be strong, though.
Yeah.
Yeah. So by the time you're done with your 18-month mission in Colorado, how are you feeling about yourself? How are you feeling about the church? Did you experience depression on your mission? Did it kind of go away during your mission?
I think I did experience it some. I did have a few phone calls with a therapist. It never was too bad, though. I think I was so focused on trying to be a good missionary that I was really trying to push away any thoughts that I felt like were going to make me feel more depressed. I think I probably was depressed, but not willing to admit it to myself in the same ways that I had been willing to admit it to myself in the past. And then I said there's three moments. The first was the Italy story. The second is I had dated this guy before my mission, and I really liked him, and I was kind of feeling distracted. You're not supposed to get distracted by romantic feelings as a missionary. And so I prayed as a missionary, and, at what point in your life are you more consecrating yourself to the Lord than as a missionary? And so I felt like if the Lord gives me revelation on my mission, I've got to be reading that revelation really well, because when have I ever been this holy? And I got this really strong feeling that I was going to marry this guy. And I felt like, okay, I'm getting this feeling because God wants to tell me, like, it's okay for you to be thinking about this during your mission because this is your future spouse, and that's very important. So I was like, okay, I'm going to keep writing this person. I'm going to keep kind of thinking about this as, like, you know, and I really started to be like, I'm going to marry this person. And I even told my companions, like, I got a revelation. I'm going to marry him, which sounds so silly now. And I met my husband after my mission. So when I got back, I hung out with this guy a few times, and it was like not jiving. And it was just, and you know, not like anything really happened. It was just like it fizzled out because we hadn't seen each other for several years because he served a mission, I served a mission. But more than anything, it was just like I received revelation. I was going to marry this person. And now I'm not really that interested in him. He's not really that interested in me. There's nothing here. What do I do with this? What do I do with this second time where I received this, what I felt like was a very massive, life-altering revelation? Like the revelation you're going to marry someone, that feels like it should be the most sacred revelation God can give a woman. But it was wrong. And I didn't marry that person. I married someone I met, 6 months after my mission. So I think that was my second point of just feeling like I had received really absolute, clear prompting on something very definitive. And then objectively, that thing did not come true.
Yeah.
So you get home from your mission. How's your testimony? You've got a second blow to your epistemology around Holy Ghost and confirmation, but in terms of the church's truth claims and your commitment to the church,
I think I got more depressed after my mission than I did during my mission because I felt almost that same repeating of the experience of getting baptized, where on my mission I was pure, I was holy, I was consecrated, and then when I came home I watched TV and I felt like I'm a bad person again, and I just started getting a lot more, I had so much more guilt after my mission because it felt like I had been able to tell myself that I was committing my life to the most beautiful cause imaginable, and once I returned from my mission I was just going to school. And that was so boring and plain and uninspired by comparison that I felt really empty because it felt like I had been so fulfilled by this message I had been able to tell myself. I'm the best, I'm a really good missionary. I'm consecrating my life to the Lord. And then now I since I can no longer tell myself that message, it became, I felt guilty. I felt like I didn't really want to date people initially. I didn't want to watch TV. I have in my journal still, I made up all these new rules for myself, like kind of like missionary rules. I think a lot of people do this. They're like, let me recreate the mission for myself because it's probably like an OCD thing. Like I miss the structure. I miss the absolute surety that I'm a good person. I miss the structure of religious purity. And so after my mission and I lost that, I really tried, I think especially in the first 3 or 4 months, I was really trying to recreate that because I just wanted to feel close to my purpose with God again.
Would it make sense to introduce the term scrupulosity as it relates to your story? There are a lot of people earlier in this episode hearing you talk about your story and saying, it sounds like scrupulosity.
Do you think
about
a technical
it that way?
diagnosis?
It is.
Yeah,
I've
never been diagnosed with that, which is why I've never, but probably mostly because I had a Mormon therapist. I don't know if a Mormon therapist, maybe they would. I don't know.
We could talk about
Now
it
they
just even having some characteristics.
Yeah, I definitely would say I've been, I would say I definitely have anxiety, definitely have depression. As far as scrupulosity goes, because I've never been
Diagnosed.
diagnosed with that, I've never said that that's a for sure thing I have. I think I definitely, if nothing else, had very clear indications of a tendency towards that.
And for those, I like to mention it as a way to educate people, because every year when I mention it, there's a whole new wave of listeners that's like, whoa, I had that, or oh, I have that. So it's important psychoeducation. Scrupulosity is religious obsessive compulsive disorder, or religious OCD. So some people wash their hands with OCD, some people count, some people hoard. Hoarding is a form of OCD, it turns out. There's, safety OCD, checking lights, flipping light switches, that sort of thing.
There's
checking
relationship
locks,
OCD.
relationship OCD. But when you have hyper religiosity, hyper concern around moral purity, around honesty, hyper confessing with the priesthood leader, those are all signs of something called scrupulosity, which is OCD with a religious lens. And so I just wanted to, you're getting back for your mission. It sounds like you're like, where's the purity? Where's the purity?
Yeah. I think I definitely had that growing up, but I don't think I had the words to describe it.
Yeah.
Or to communicate it to the therapists I did see. So I got back from my mission. I met my husband. And I think meeting him and having a lot of the early conversations in our relationship were probably the first times that I started to, I don't think I was questioning yet, but I think I was starting to become nuanced. I think I meet a lot of Mormons who even self-identify as nuanced Mormons, and to me, almost 90% of the time, that is code for come back in a year because I'm gonna be out of the church. Because the nuance, I think you can stay in forever as a nuanced Mormon, but it seems to me that a lot of people who begin to become nuanced, it's because they're starting to break down some of these previously held very rigid beliefs. So when we were first dating, we were talking, and for some reason we brought, I don't know, somehow gay marriage got brought up, and I very confidently said, I think being gay is fine, but I just don't think gay people should be able to get married. And this was pre-gay marriage legalization too.
So pre-2015.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I just remember, and he served a mission too. He served his mission in Sweden. And so, I'm checking the box, like, you're a good candidate for me to date because you check the Mormon boxes. But he said, why do you think your religion should be used to keep other people from having rights? And I just felt my jaw drop on the floor, because I don't think I expected to have to defend my obviously bigoted opinion to another Mormon. I think I assumed with Jackson, especially when we were first dating, that I could just spout whatever Mormon thing it is that Mormons say, and that he would say, yes, that's, we're on the same page here. And I, kind of tumbled over my words and was just like, well, it's, and I couldn't really defend it. I felt like his defense of gay marriage was compelling enough that I felt like the Mormon argument against it just fell flat. And it was the first time I'd ever had a Mormon disagree with me about something like that. A Mormon who was like, he had a good calling. He served a mission. He was in church all 3 hours. He was doing all of the Mormon things, but he was like, I don't think you should be anti-gay marriage. That doesn't make sense. And that level of kind of pushing back was, I think, why I fell in love with him, which was very confusing at the time, because I felt like when he said that, I legitimately was like, I should break up with him. No good Mormon.
Danger.
Yeah. But at the same time, in the same way that I had felt meh about the Book of Mormon and loved all these classic literature, books growing up, I felt compelled by what he was saying, this argument for logic and for reason and for compassion that didn't exist within Mormonism. And I think the self within me that has always been within me felt really connected with that. And a lot of other times that he, we had a lot of conversations. Another one was like, he said that sex education should be comprehensive and not just abstinence-based. And I was like, no good Mormon says that either. Where are you getting these crazy ideas? Abstinence-only sex education is the way to go. And he said, I think it's healthier for kids or for teens, to have some sort of understanding how their body works and how to prevent pregnancy and how to prevent STDs. And it was another dumbstruck moment where I just was like, I don't know how to respond to this because I've never heard these arguments before. I've never had to wrestle with these ideas he's kind of throwing at me. And
so do you know if at the time he was challenging you or educating you, if he had lost his faith or if he was just a faithful Mormon that saw a couple things differently?
Yeah, his mom left the church when she was really young, and his parents got divorced, and he spent time going back and forth between the two. So I think having a mom that was not a member for most of, they got divorced when he was 2 or 3. So his entire upbringing, he was seeing an example of a person who was no longer in the church, drinking a glass of wine occasionally, maybe talking about some of these aspects of sex, sex education, gay marriage, like things that if both of his parents were Mormon, maybe he wouldn't have heard. And so I think he is maybe in the similar category as my dad, where he just had been exposed to a lot more viewpoints. And I think, I don't know, I wish he was here. I wish you were here, Jackson. I don't think he would say he was truly struggling with his faith at that point, but I also think he's always been the type of Mormon that's like, I love the community here. I like the people I meet. I like having a community to participate in, and this is my cultural community. So I wouldn't say, I don't think if he was here, he would say that at that point he was actively questioning as much as he just grew up in a part-member family and had a more complex view of the world than I did.
Which really, that's differentiation. Like, he honestly grew up with different perspectives and loved people with different, like your parents. So can I just say, when you were describing talking with Jackson and having those conversations and how you hit a point where you're like, wait, that's not according to script. You're off script. It reminded me of Truman Show a little bit. Just how he always is going, every day he goes out and everyone has the same response. And then it starts to veer, and all of a sudden you're like, wait a second. Yeah. That's not how, and it is like that in Mormonism. You ask a question, but you're not really asking a question. Yeah. What you're asking is for the preset answers that everyone knows.
Back you're supposed to say.
That's right. And when people don't, it's like that moment in Truman Show where it's like, wait a second, what's going on?
I don't know what to do with this.
My reality is, what's going on with my reality right now?
What?
Yeah. Well, especially being in Provo, being at BYU, it just felt like I had been on so many dates with so many guys, and I know that if I had said gay marriage is bad to any of those guys, they would have said, yes, ma'am, I agree. And I don't like gay people either. I just feel like meeting this person who was at once Mormon and at the same time not Mormon was really very Truman Showy and I think why I fell in love with him, because he was not a parrot. He was not just parroting back. I know the church is true. I know the church is true. I love the temple. I love the temple too. He was actively engaging with me on ideas and presenting things that were off script, but still really interesting and felt really compelling.
Which is also very dangerous for a Mormon testimony.
It was dangerous, for sure.
Really quickly, I'm just going to do a quick plug for this book. Today is the day that Alyssa Grenfell is releasing this wonderful new book, How to Leave the Mormon Church. I was honored enough to write a foreword for it. But we put the link to this book in the description. And this is a book. It's a great gift for people who are going through hard stuff. It's a really good guide for those of you who are trying to find your way. I really think this is a book that's going to do really well. So I just want to let everyone know about it. Please get it. Please show your support and to get it for anyone you need. We're going to be covering the book tomorrow in a second episode, 10 tips on leaving the Mormon Church. Not for everyone, just for those who feel like it's what they need to do. So, all right. So you meet Jackson. He's starting to rock your world. How long between meeting him and getting married?
I think we knew each other for about 6 months before we got engaged, and then married another 6 months. So
Wow, full year.
yeah,
That's actually a little long.
And I was 23, so I was an old maid, and we really made sure we knew each other before we tied the knot. And I feel like we had a funny moment. I always think it's funny just thinking about Jackson's personality, but there was a time where we were making out and I felt like we went too far, and I was like, Jackson, I think I need to confess to the bishop. And just to be clear, it was just like over the clothes. It was not like, it was stuff that most people do, you know.
We're not in the bishop's office now, Alyssa. No need.
No, I felt like it was so important to me to save myself for marriage. So, but yeah, but even over the clothes touching, I was like, I need to confess this to the bishop. And he was like, you know, I prayed about it and I don't think I need to confess it to the bishop. And I remember being like, that feels like,
You can do that?
by Mormon logic, it checks out, but that feels way easier than talking to the bishop.
That was like option F.
Yeah.
There's an option F.
I think he was just like, I don't want to talk to the bishop about this. And I was like, I have to, because I have religious I've always struggled with that word. Scrupulosity. Yes.
So did you talk to the bishop?
I did, yeah. He said it was fine. He said, you guys are engaged, so just don't do anything more till you're married. So I never had a bishop really grill me on stuff like that in a way that was it like a one-on-one inappropriate. So I'm very lucky in that regard.
Yeah.
So we got married.
In the temple?
We got married in the temple,
Which temple?
Payson Temple.
Payson.
Yeah.
Is that where he's from?
No, it was so random. I really wanted to get married in the city center temple because it's very pretty, but it wasn't ready. And I think the Payson
Wait,
temple
is that Provo? Is that what's city center?
City isn't. Oh, it's not city center. What's the one
Salt Lake
that's
City?
no, that's city center mall. What is the mall?
I don't know. In Orem?
I haven't lived here in a long time.
Are you talking about Provo, Orem?
I'm talking about the temple that's in downtown Provo.
Okay, it was the old library
What's
or
that
whatever
one
that's
called?
been converted into a. Yeah.
Oh,
I thought
don't
that was
know.
called the city center
No,
temple.
it probably is.
Probably
Okay.
is.
So
Sorry,
this is- yeah,
we're not
okay.
up to speed on.
We were all a little far behind.
We left you
So
hanging.
not the Provo
like
temple, the one downtown Provo. Yeah.
So they were completing the work on the Provo downtown temple, and it was going to
Yeah.
be another 6 months, and we couldn't wait. So
It's right by the Encircle House.
yes.
Yeah,
Is it called the City Center Temple? Okay.
yeah.
So the Payson Temple had just recently been dedicated at the point of the wedding. So we were like, it's a beautiful temple. All temples are the same anyways. And my wedding day was so, I just hate how the church does batch, you're on the conveyor belt. I was hurried on my own wedding day. The idea of being rushed, they're like, there's another bride coming through in 10 minutes. So your wedding is important, but not important in the way that you want it to be. It's important eternally for Mormonism. So I hated wearing the temple clothes. They did not allow me to wear my wedding dress because it was too cream. Even though if
Really?
you can look
Temple.
at my website, it's the widest dress imaginable. But they at the Payson Temple at least, I don't know if they still do this, but they hold a piece of computer paper up against your dress. They really did this to me.
Wow.
And they said, your dress is not white enough. You have to change into...
It's for color.
yeah, for
White
color.
enough.
It was, my dress was super modest, totally
Not
garment
white
covering,
enough.
but it was not white enough.
I've never heard of that.
Me either.
Maybe I do think other people online have shared that's happened.
Oh,
I
I'm
can
sure it's
imagine.
no.
We're not saying.
Something that we don't realize is the Mormon Church is getting more conservative in many ways than it was 20 or 30 or 40 years ago.
Yeah, it's like more conservative and more liberal at the same time.
Right.
It just depends on the thing.
The thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I had to change into a different dress. I had to change into my temple robes. We did the patriarchal grip across the altar. The officiant mispronounced my name. Didn't even know my name. We said the yes, because you don't get to say I do. And walked out, took pictures. And, it was still a very happy day. It's your wedding. So even though there were all of these Mormon frustrations and annoyances, I was very happy and very happy to be with the love of my life, Jackson. I'm, still with him, and I am grateful at least to Mormonism for bringing him into my life. But yeah, we got married, and we got married in the winter, and then that August is when I first started my first year of teaching, which is where everything really hit the fan.
Oh,
as far as my testimony goes. That's where the breakdown really started to happen.
is high school English or?
Yes, ninth grade in American Fork.
American Fork. Okay.
Yeah. And I've had a surprisingly large amount of my students reach out to me through TikTok and be like, sorry, or like, I left the church, or, just share nice messages. Because I've talked quite a bit about teaching on my account, but
It was kind of brutal. You had some brutal moments.
yeah, I feel like just from the beginning to the end, it was such an awful experience. And if you remember, I received a blessing that I was supposed to be an English teacher, and I dedicated 4 years of my degree to that, and I never questioned. And I was just not cut out for it. I have pretty bad anxiety. I'd have really bad anxiety attacks in the morning. A lot of the kids at the school didn't like me because I think I was young. I was still only 23. And I had a no phones policy. And then I would also teach things that a lot of the kids would not like. So at one point I talked about gay marriage, or like, I think, the New York Times has all these articles for English teachers to use that are like compare and contrast, or, perspectives. So I picked one that was a perspective that I had actually been given in my multicultural class at BYU. So I was like, I'll use this is from BYU. I'll use it in my class. And the kids were saying, we don't think gay marriage should be a thing. And one of the kids used, I heard the slur FAG constantly in that school. And there was a group of kids who would wait till I was doing silent reading, and they would come bang on my door, and they would film it on Snapchat and like run away and film my reaction. And at one point a kid threw a smoke bomb under my door and the administration just really didn't do anything to help. And I'd have all these things happening, and I'd have
Didn't they leave you notes too?
Yeah. So the notes was when I was teaching a book about Emmett Till, who is a 14-year-old boy.
Should we do the LGBT thing before we do the Emmett Till story?
Yes.
Okay.
So I had one student who was a really good student, and he, the first essay I ever gave, it was supposed to be a 5-paragraph essay, and he wrote his essay about why students shouldn't have to write essays, which was really clever. And it was about how the essay isn't a good measure of intelligence. And I just found it was very clever and very engaging. And I gave him a really good grade on it. And his mom called me, and she was kind of tearing up, and she said that was the most positive thing that had happened to him that school year, because he'd been facing a lot of bullying. And a period of time later, when I was walking into my classroom after hallway duty, I saw all these kids, probably 3 or 4 boys, like calling this boy that had written the essay, FAG, and laughing at him and pointing at him. And these are the same kids that had seminary before my class. So they like would be still holding, you see in Utah schools, all the kids are holding their little quads, and just something about kids with quads on their desks bullying this kid. And I don't know if this kid was gay. I have no idea. But later that year, he just stopped coming to school. And I found out through another teacher that this student had attempted suicide and had that the parents decided to take him out of the school and go somewhere else. I don't know where they went because it was not a good, obviously, situation for him. And
sometimes when the LGBT youth suicide epidemic is brought up to Mormons, they try and say it's the altitude, or they try and say it's guns or whatever. In your experience, did you get to experience reasons why a Mormon LGBT youth in Utah might consider that option? Is that?
Yeah, I feel like the kids in class, when I'm giving an assignment about gay people, are saying, I don't like gay people. I don't think gay people are good. I think being gay is a sin. I think gay people shouldn't be able to get married. And if you're a gay kid hearing that, not just at church, but now at school, and from your parents, and if that gay kid is like me, where all I wanted to do was be good. I didn't, I'm guessing these kids who are gay, all they want to do is pray the gay away, like keep it, I think that they desperately want to not be gay, but everything in them is saying that they are, and they have to face this really horrible and awful reality, which is that this feeling that they're feeling is from the devil, in the same way I felt like my body was immoral as well, and it demonizes, and to keep it a secret and keep it inside and be, as religious as possible and be as, good as possible. And I think it creates one of the most damaging, I think for a gay kid to grow up in Utah is horrible, especially in ultra Mormon areas, because the church is explicit about gayness, same-sex attraction, being gay. It is wrong. And they might say, we still love gay people, but that's just a way for them to dismiss the obligation to confront what they do to gay people. We love gay people, but we hate everything about them if they act on it. I think that to me, what gay kids have to go through and what little girls have to go through are the two biggest evils of the church currently. That little girls are told that they matter less than boys and that all they should think about is marriage, and that gay kids are told this feeling that you're feeling makes you inherently sinful and makes you bad. And you will never be able to get rid of it through prayer, unfortunately.
And I want to validate all that, and I don't want to compete in the trauma Olympics, but I think young boys being told if they masturbate, they're evil, and they can't not masturbate. I think that's a trifecta of
everybody
harm.
Yeah
No one escapes
and also people of color, and like as it turns out, there are a lot of people outside this box of
I think that it's very easy to see the smiling family of that Mormonism often presents, and say, hey, Mormonism is really good. It's good for families. It's good for all these people, look at all these people who are blessed by this in their lives. But if you look underneath the surface and look at the racism, look at the sexism, look at the homophobia, underneath this smiling veneer of happy families, you'll see kids trying to kill themselves, and kids hating themselves for the color of their skin, or being teased for the color of their skin, or girls who are told not to dress XYZ because it makes them a slut.
I'm getting a comment from Just Kiddin. She writes, I guess, she says John, boys and girls. And what she means by that is
Masturbation.
Yeah. Really quickly, Gerardo's wanting me to ask you if you have any insight on new emerging Mormon apologetic around the LGBT youth suicide epidemic in Utah. Is that Mormon LGBT youth in Utah have better mental health outcomes than non-Mormon LGBT youth in Utah? Do you have any, I'm putting you on the spot here, do you have any theory on why, as bad as an experience a Mormon LGBT youth might have in Utah, they fare better than non-Mormon LGBT youth?
I might want to say I would have to like see the study that information came from and who conducted that study, because it feels to me to be like, what was the sample size? What was this a church-sponsored study? I don't know I don't know where that information is coming from. I just know from my anecdotal experience that gay kids do not feel like they belong in the same way that their heterosexual friends belong in the church.
You're saying Mormon gay kids in Utah. Yeah. I mean, one theory is that they have Mormon gay kids at least have their youth groups. They have mutual, they have scouts, they have community. And maybe these other non-Mormon kids are isolated and rejected because they're not Mormon from all the Mormon kids.
Oh, yeah.
And they don't have they don't necessarily have the community and the friends.
Yeah.
So maybe they're just
But
more
that's
isolated.
so complicated, isn't it? Because the more you're participating in a community that tells you you're sinful, the more you're getting the messages that to belong, you're viewed as sinful. I don't know. Feels complicated.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so that's a brutal. Those are some brutal experiences. What others?
The other one was when I was teaching about racism. And to be clear, a lot of critics say, "Why are you teaching about racism in an English class?" There is a required amount of nonfiction reading students have to do. They're actually supposed to read more nonfiction when I was a teacher in Utah, more nonfiction than fiction, because it's supposed to prepare them for STEM. So I was reading a nonfiction book with them, which was about Emmett Till. And
how could you not read books about racism in a high school English class? Like To Kill a Mockingbird. Like you got to read these things.
I mean, people get
just to be a human.
It is reality.
People get frustrated. I mean, there's all these bills in Florida to keep people from talking about
racism,
anything to do with transphobia or racism, because they want to remove it from the curriculum because they say it's activism. So it's, I think, a real critique of teachers teaching history is you're teaching about critical race theory.
That's so weird. Like I remember reading Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail, like learning about Gandhi. Like that's part of a high school education. Civil rights movement, right?
Yeah, I think it's very politicized now to teach, especially I think with the Trump era and with, I think, all of these governors trying to show like who's the most Republican. I think that's leading to a lot of these types of laws that are coming into effect, even about teaching about gender in schools, teaching about race in schools. They're saying that should be taught at home, or that's activism, that's critical race theory, when really it's actually just the story of Emmett Till is history. It's also about racism, obviously, but you can't say teaching a history book is the English teacher is acting out of activism to try to coerce her students into becoming crazy liberals when you're reading a book that's about history. So
really quickly, I have Republican listeners, and we are never here favoring one party over another, and we're certainly not saying that Republicans are racist. I'm a registered Republican in Utah for my own set of reasons, but please don't ever feel like we're throwing that on anyone just because we want everyone to feel welcome. But anyway, not that you were.
About that.
No, you didn't do anything. I'm just making sure people know we don't pick sides in that way, in a just purely partisan way. So what was it? Do you want to give the quick summary of the Emmett Till story, and then,
Yeah, just so he was they said that he was whistling at a white woman. She said that he was whistling at her.
It was like 1955, like a teenage kid, right?
Yeah, very
Chicago.
14. And so she went home and told her husband. Basically, he gathered up a bunch of other men. They kidnapped him and murdered him. And when they found his body, his mom decided to do an open casket funeral.
He had been like chained to a washing machine or
was
something.
Yeah, it was
and,
really horrible.
and like sunk down to the bottom of a.
He'd been in the water for
Yeah.
a long. His body had been in the water for. It was very. His body was very deteriorated and abused, and
You said the mom did the open casket. Why?
yes, so she wanted to do an open casket, which is why it got in the national news, because she wanted to show what these men had done to her 14-year-old son. And that, to me, is a very powerful choice. And I felt like it's in the book. The picture of the open casket funeral was in the book we were reading, but also, I think, to honor that idea that she had to share this horrible thing that had happened. So we did it's called a gallery walk in my classroom. So we walked around. So you put different artifacts around the classroom, and kids have sticky notes, and they're supposed to go around. So it might be like something to do with, Jim Crow laws. It might be something to do with some historic document. It was the picture of Emmett Till, other things relating to the case that ensued after this happened. And as it was happening, I heard some laughter from the area of the classroom that was where the picture was of the open casket. And I looked over. It's quieted. And so I walked over as I'm kind of walking through the classroom, and I see that at the picture there are notes that are basically mocking the picture. The one was said, ha ha, there was a smiley face, and one that said, he looks like a hamburger. And I just took the notes off, and I was just staring at them, just not even knowing what to do, like how to respond as a 23-year-old in her first months of teaching, how to respond to this very obvious display of horrible racism, but also like complete lack of empathy. And I turned around and just was like, what is wrong with you? Who did this? And everyone was obviously very, quiet. I don't know who did it. It wasn't obvious to me at the time. Maybe if it happened to me now, I would have been able to tell. But I just felt like, I remember thinking that if this had been a walk about a gallery walk about Joseph Smith's death, and it had been a picture of Joseph Smith, that there's no way that those kids would have reacted that way. They would have had the most solemn, serious, respect for this experience. And I also, throughout teaching the book, I had kids say, like, racism doesn't exist, or I don't want to learn about this anymore, this is pointless, or I don't think we need to talk about this in school. And I think between that experience and having one of my students attempt suicide, and having these students rolling smoke bombs under my door, I felt like, first of all, teaching was not for me. I just didn't want to be a teacher. I felt like the only reason I was in there to begin with was because of this blessing from my father 6 years ago, mission plus college. And I felt like what I was seeing was, I don't blame any of those kids. I just think that they are acting in the way that they've learned. I don't think a kid naturally is going to tease someone for being gay. I think that that's a value that's trained and a value that's inserted by a very Mormon culture. And so between those two things, seeing these kids, seeing this experience, and seeing and just having these like awful experiences, having and feeling like I am not cut out for teaching. I don't want to be doing this. I don't feel like this is what is right for me. I'm very unhappy. And I even became kind of suicidal, which I felt like was in large part because I was just so deeply unhappy, and I was showing up to work every day and having these experiences and feeling like I was so disconnected from my reality that I just felt like maybe the church, maybe God isn't, maybe this is all made up. And it was so scary. It was about, it was maybe 4 months into teaching that I was just having another panic attack. And all I could think about was maybe maybe God isn't leading me. Maybe all of this is just my gut telling me what to do and my dad trying his best, and it's all made up. And it was so hard for me to face that because I served a mission. I went to early morning seminary. I did everything that I was supposed to. And yet still, instead of having this like trial of an experience, which maybe I could write off, I was having an experience that was leading me to like thoughts of killing myself. And I don't know what loving Heavenly Father really does that to his daughter.
Yeah. And this is what, your first year or two of marriage?
Yes, we'd probably been married. So that was, it was about a year of marriage that was about a year into marriage that I started questioning personally. I hadn't told Jackson yet, but I was personally very, very much questioning.
So did you have anyone to confide in or talk to about your doubts? Or did you feel alone in those?
I think because Jackson had always been so nuanced, I felt okay with bringing my worry to him. And he had also been seeing me struggle with teaching throughout all this time, and seeing me come home and be so wrecked and so upset and so sad. And one night I just decided to tell him, and I said, I don't know if the church, I don't even think it was about the church quite yet. I think it was about God. I don't know if there really is a God, because all these times that I've taken God at his word with my still small voice, it was wrong. And he was very loving. He was, I feel so lucky. A lot of people say that to their spouses, and the marriage.
It's a deal killer.
Yeah. He was really loving. He was really, he at the time said, I still believe in God. I still want to go to church, but I love you. And I'm here for you, and I'm sorry you're going through this. And he was nothing but supportive. And I wish everyone could have a Jackson when they leave the Mormon Church, because I think having someone to share that information with and having them reciprocate with love was really very powerful, and very helped me feel safe in a moment that was the least safe moment of my life.
And was that the end of it, or was that just the beginning of you questioning the church and figuring out a relationship with the church?
Yeah, I would say that was the beginning.
Of what?
The beginning of the end.
Okay.
I started.
And again, this is 9 years ago?
Yeah, it's about, I guess, 7 or 8 years ago.
Okay.
The process played out over about a year, so it was over a longer period of time. But sorry, it's like, it's a little hot.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so, yeah.
Do you have?
Do you want to take a break? Do you want to?
Yeah, maybe I'll. Is that
Okay, yeah. I'll go ahead and I'll just say while you take a quick break. Hey, live stream. I was just going to say, I wonder, I was thinking about growing up in Utah myself. Growing up in Texas myself. And when you, for those of you who aren't Mormon and don't understand the dynamics, Utah is kind of considered Mormon Zion. So it's like the Mormon promised land. It's where the church is headquartered. It's where Brigham Young brought the saints. It's where the prophet and the 12 apostles live. And so, like, if you are born and raised as a Mormon outside of Utah, it's almost like Dorothy living in Kansas, but always dreaming about Oz. And so when you come to BYU or to Utah, it's like, whoa, I can attend General Conference in person, and whoa, I may, this is where the real Mormons are, and this is where the real Mormon families are, and this is where the most righteous of the righteous are, and I can get my most righteousness self fully actuated because I'm here in Zion. I'm here in the Lord's true state, Utah, right? And so it's kind of like when Dorothy goes to Oz, right? But then ultimately Dorothy goes to Oz, and she ultimately goes to see the wizard, but then she sees Toto running around, and that there's a wizard behind the curtain. There's this idea of when Dorothy goes to Oz, but then sees that Oz wasn't, the wizard, wasn't what she thought, and Oz wasn't what she thought. And I'm just wondering, and I don't mean to project this onto your story, Alyssa, and that was me filling space while she went to take a break. I hope so. Please don't get mad at me for like injecting myself in her story. But I do wonder, was it weird to like grow up outside of the Zion curtain, as they say, come to Utah thinking you're going to be swimming amongst the elite of the elite, true righteous Mormons? You're in Utah County of all places, teaching children of super righteous multi-generational Mormons, and seeing all this bigotry. I don't know. I don't mean to be projecting that on you.
Yeah, I think, I think seeing these kids and seeing how they acted, how they treated each other, how rude they were to me, but also how rude they were and horrible they were to each other, and just feeling like, if this is the most Mormon population on the planet.
Which it is. Utah County.
This is the deepest, most Mormon you can get. And yet they are still so horrible to me, to each other. What does that mean about the church? What does that mean about how these children are being taught by their parents? And two, I think just having this feeling of, and even looking around and seeing other adults being, I guess, coping with it better, and feeling like this is not for me. I'm not suited for this. This is not in my disposition. I'm more of an introvert. I think I just realized if this is what the church creates, and if this is what my father's blessing brought me to, can I really logically continue to say that everything is the absolute truth as I've always believed it? And that really was the beginning of, and at the same time, and I think too, I'd always used my testimony, my spiritual feeling, to feel compelled to be able to just get over Mormon history. If I learned about polygamy, if I learned about anything, I could say, well, I know the Spirit bore witness to me that I have a testimony of Joseph Smith. I know that he was a prophet of God. I know the Book of Mormon is the word of God. So you can show me any history. I used to believe this on my mission. Show me any history. I don't care what it is. I still am going to believe Joseph Smith was a prophet because I had a feeling in my heart, and that feeling told me very strongly that he's a prophet. So you could tell me anything about that man.
I am titanium.
Yeah. It doesn't matter what you tell me about Joseph Smith. I know he was a prophet of God.
Because I felt it.
Because I felt it in my gut. And at this time that I was going through teaching, Jackson was taking at the time they had changed the BYU religious curriculum to have a history class that had more, he always called it Defense Against the Dark Arts. I don't know what the actual word was or the actual name of the class, but they had just incorporated some more like questionable church history to try to help.
Wait, questionable or factual?
Well, questionable in their eyes, factual for everyone else. And so he was going, and they had like end of class project, and he made this big graph of all of Joseph Smith's wives and how they were related to each other, the mother-sister pairs, the ones who were married to other men, and he made this big infographic about it. And he took it to his professor, and he was asking him these questions about, how is this graph God's plan? Can you explain it to me? Because I'm having a hard time seeing how Joseph marrying 14-year-olds and Joseph Smith marrying the wives of other men being part of God's eternal plan. And the professor basically just said, I don't know the meaning of all things, but I know the Lord loves his children, that little chestnut. And and so he would go to this class, and he'd come home and he'd be telling me, here's what I learned in class today. We'd be reading some more. Of course, we discovered the CES letter. We read through that together.
Really quick, I'm just going to show on the screen this infographic you're talking about, just to our viewers and listeners. It's kind of intense, but it basically, I'm showing it just on the screen right here, but it just shows. It's kind of crazy because it's got
so complex.
7 wives under 18, 14-year-olds, 15-year-olds, and it's got sister pairs, and it's got mother-daughter pairs, and it's got the 8 polyandrous marriages where it's showing along the right all the husbands who were living and mostly faithful in the church, and then all of their wives that Joseph married. It's kind of an overwhelming infographic, and it ends at the bottom with 34 wives. So
yeah, it really is very complex and interwoven how they all fit together.
Yeah.
And so I think as I kind of was losing my faith or belief in a God, or at least in a heavenly Father, he was losing his faith or belief in Mormonism as an institution and as a religion. And we're kind of, we would just talk for hours and hours and hours. And it was kind of crazy, too, to realize how much we'd been holding back from each other. Even like I think he was the first person I truly confessed to that I hated the endowment. Everyone else, I had always just said, I loved it. It was so beautiful, because that's what you're supposed to say. And I felt so unworthy or like lacking in faith that I didn't like it. And he was like, I didn't like it either. And I remember we told each other, I mean, he knew my new name, but he told me his new name. And it was just a very triumphant moment to be like, now we're equals. Like,
right.
I get to know your secret, you know mine. And we just had all of these conversations together, just talking through every single tiny little aspect of Mormonism, of our upbringing, and really just finally after, like crazy, we'd known each other for 2 years, married for 1, finally ready, at least especially on my part, finally ready to be fully honest about all these times that I had lacked faith, which were actually times that I had realized Mormonism had a lot of problematic elements, but had felt like I lacked faith. And so finally being able to rebrand my lack of faith as the reality of, I think I have struggled to connect with this religion for a very, very long time. And I always felt like it was a me problem, not an institutional problem or a faith-based problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you said rebrand, recontextualize is another way to say it, reframe. Mm-hmm. And there is this idea of blame reversal where an unhealthy organization, if things are going great, they get the credit. if things are going wrong, you get the blame. It's always back
Yeah.
on you, right?
Yes, and I bought that, so I swallowed it whole. Like I really believed that that I was always the one that if I had a problem with the temple, if I had a problem with a mission rule, if I had a problem with sexuality or masturbation, or if I had a problem with any of these elements, or I didn't like how they were being discussed, I was just lacking in faith. And that is such powerful control. I feel like that element of how Mormonism taught me to view myself in that way, that it was my fault, that controlled me for so long.
Really, really quickly, because I got a chance to read this book, How to Leave the Mormon Church, an Ex-Mormon's Guide to Rebuilding After Religion, which I hope you all buy today or immediately. One of the things I loved about it was your candor, your courage to talk about really hard things. And so because you just brought it up, and because I know it's in the book, you haven't talked about masturbation at all in terms of your experience. But because you bring it up in the book, and because, as my commenters are mentioning, it's not just a male thing.
Right.
Is there any part, like, was that even a part of your story at that point or not?
I would say I planned a lot for the book tomorrow to talk about that.
Okay, so
I would
stay
say
tuned. Stay tuned.
Cliffhanger.
Okay, good. Perfect.
Stay tuned.
Perfect.
Because that's one of my main topics
One of
of
your
outline
10
for tomorrow.
10
Yeah.
things. Perfect.
So
All right, stay tuned.
save it
Okay. All
for
right.
tomorrow.
Okay, so you and Jackson are having this sort of like...
Yeah, and I think it was probably took place over maybe 3 or 4 months where we were just having these conversations. He's bringing stuff home, I'm bringing stuff home. We're talking, texting. We find the Ex-Mormon subreddit. We're sharing memes with each other and links with each other. And I hit a Sunday where I woke up in the morning and I told him, I can't go to church today. And he was, I think, pretty surprised. And he said, I still want to go to church.
Well, he's a BYU student, so he has to.
Well, he was on this, he doesn't have a degree. Basically, he was doing this like associates thing that was like, it's like the Church Institute thing. I don't know. It was like a special program. So he did technically have to have ecclesiastical endorsement, but because it lasts for a year, that wasn't really part of the worry, essentially.
Good.
But he did still genuinely want to go to church. So he went to church that Sunday, and I stayed home, doom scrolling the Ex-Mormon subreddit. I would make it to the bottom of the Ex-Mormon subreddit. There would be no new posts, and I would just sit like refreshing it every 5 minutes, just to be like, is anyone else going to say anything? Because I will listen to anyone at this point. I just need more voices to support me right now. And he came home. We talked. Next Sunday, I woke up. I felt the same way. I'm not going to church. I can't do it. I just think I started to feel like I cannot keep going to this church. I do not believe it's true. I feel so gross inside when I'm there. And then the third Sunday, I felt like I need to try again. I need to just give it one. I almost didn't even see it as one final chance, but that I was ready to try again. Like maybe something will be different. Maybe I'll feel edified by this experience of going to church. And so we went together that Sunday, and we both didn't take the sacrament, but we were still sitting in church, and I just felt like a liar. I just felt like by being in that church, I was participating in a lie, and I was almost like I was pretending to be a member when I felt like I wasn't. And I just felt like it was a lie, it was immoral almost for me to be participating at all. And I made it through sacrament meeting in Sunday school, and I went to Relief Society. And in what I feel like was kind of ironic, the woman was like, we don't have, nobody planned a lesson for today. So instead of doing a lesson, we're all going to bear our testimonies about Joseph Smith. Which the idea to, I think, most people outside of Mormonism, that you would have an entire hour dedicated to bearing your testimony about Joseph Smith, not about God, not about Jesus, but about Joseph Smith, it's kind of wild. But she had the photo of Joseph Smith that we all know up on the lectern. She sat down, and everyone starts getting up, and And I just felt it was so frustrating because everyone was saying, it was just this, everyone saying the same thing, same testimony over and over and over again. And someone read the words of praise to the man, and someone cried and read the quote about how nobody except for Jesus has done more on this planet except for Joseph Smith. And there was not one drop of the word polygamy. And no one talked about, like, I had been researching and learning all this stuff with Jackson, all this stuff about Joseph Smith, that despite 2 decades in the church, I never knew. And we're having an hour-long conversation about Joseph Smith, and none of these things are even hinting at entering the conversation. And once again, I just felt like this is just a lie. I just feel like this is such a whitewashed version of reality. And it was very Truman Showy also in that moment. And as I was sitting there, I was thinking about how in my mission, I used to always tell people that if you don't have a testimony, that a testimony is found in the bearing of it. And so I very authentically and hopefully said, I will bear my testimony right now, because maybe if I bear my testimony, I will find it again. And maybe this is my opportunity. And so I stood up and I looked around and I just said, I'd like to bear my testimony, and that I know that even though Joseph Smith was a polygamist and that he married people under 18, that I have felt good feelings about him in the past. And because I felt good feelings about him, that must mean that he is a prophet of God. And that those things don't matter because God chose him as a prophet. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen. And I sat down, and I just so desperately hoped that I would have some epiphany, some revelation, some angel, anything. And I looked up and looked around, and instead it was just the eyes of every single woman in the room staring at me like, what is wrong with you? Why are you talking about that? And the Relief Society president had been saying thank you to everyone after they had finished bearing their testimony. And she didn't say thank you to me. She stood up and she just launched into her own just Mormon-y, most Mormon testimony.
Repair.
Of Joseph Smith imaginable.
Damage control.
That's right.
Impassioned. It had all the right things. And I sat there for a few more minutes, just like waiting, just like almost paralyzed by just the frustration and almost just feeling like this is the final moment. This is the moment where I chose to wear my garments, and now this is another crossroads where I can't do this anymore. And after a few minutes, I stood up and I left. And I didn't really expect anyone to follow me, but no one did. And I think at the time I was almost disappointed, not because I thought that people were ready to confront this information about Joseph Smith, but almost hopeful that someone would care enough to, someone who bears their testimony about Joseph Smith and polygamy and then leaves a few minutes later, you gotta wonder about that person. But nobody followed me. And I sat in the car till Jackson was done with priesthood. And that was my last time I ever was in a Mormon church.
Oh, to this day.
Except for a wedding.
Right.
Which, can't get away from the weddings. But no, yeah, that was I've never attended a worship service. I've been asked, but I feel like I can't do it. I probably could now. I'm away from it enough that it doesn't feel so visceral, but I wouldn't go in unless I was really forced to. Because it's almost maybe the opposite of how I used to feel about the church, where I was like so compelled by it, and now I think it's just a dark place for me. When I talk to active members and I see them bearing their testimony or sharing things in the way that I used to. And it makes me feel sad about my past for how much I gave to Mormonism. And it makes me feel sad for them for potentially being caught up in this very dogmatic religion that is so all-encompassing that there is a right response for everything. There is a right way to be for everything. It's just, I think interfacing with going to church, interfacing with members, I struggle sometimes because I see myself so much in it and I see my past so much in it. And it's like, it is a bit physically painful for me to have to confront that part of myself that used to loom so large.
Yeah.
It's so disorienting because on the one hand, our Mormon brain is like, man, the Mormon Church created Alyssa. Like, what's not to love about the Mormon Church? This is a delightful, thoughtful, moral, ethical human. Whatever church created this human, thumbs up to that church. Like, that's one part of what my Mormon brain does. And the other part of my, let's say my ex-Mormon brain, it's like, yeah, you just listed bigotry, racism, LGBTQ oppression to the point of people wanting to die by suicide, sexual messages to both boys and girls, men and women that are extremely damaging, teaching women that they're less than, sexual shame, and just the general not teaching the truth about the history and perpetuating whitewashed falsities about the history, not to mention the coercion and the undue influence of the leaders on the members. Like it in my brain, it's this beautiful Truman Show, amazing reality, and this super dark, toxic, damaging thing at the same time, you know?
Yeah, it's very...
Is it that way for you or not? Maybe it's just the latter for you.
It's probably now just more the latter, but I think I've heard the argument that Mormonism brings a lot of good into the world. My response would just be, aren't there ways we can engage with our communities that don't involve the things that Mormonism brings with it? I don't know if we can easily invent those things. Mormonism, especially in a place like Utah where Mormonism is so pervasive. I think engaging in my community where I live in Texas, where there aren't a lot of members, I rarely meet a member of the church. It feels easier to be removed from the context of Mormonism altogether and to engage with people a little bit more just as human beings and without the context of the church. I think too that it's difficult for me to accept the good parts of Mormonism because it feels like they come at the cost of those who suffer at the hands of Mormonism. And I talked about this before, but there's under the banner of heaven, there's a line where she is yelling at one of the husbands and she says, "Does it make you feel taller to stand on the necks of women and children?" And that line made me cry because I feel like the Mormon Church stands tall on the necks of oppressed people, on the necks of gay and lesbian LGBTQ community, on the necks of races, people who won't be accepted because of their race, people who won't be accepted into leadership positions because of their genitals, people who won't be accepted into all of these different levels at which...
Women.
Yes. Women don't have the right genitals, so they can't be prophet. Right, they can't pass the sacrament. They can't sit on the stand. They can't participate in all these ways that men just walk right through the door because they're men. Because what? Because they're men. Because that's the only difference. And I think that's why I probably take a slightly more... I don't know. I'm fine if people call me an angry ex-Mormon or a bitter ex-Mormon, or whatever you want to call it. I just feel like the Mormon Church shouldn't be excused for the bad it does because of the good it does.
It's important, yeah.
And I think of how many billions of dollars given through tithing money that is sent into Apple stock, sent into whatever other portfolio options.
Tesla, Google,
like
Facebook,
that
Meta.
is also, that's damage. That's money given by members to support people in need. And it's put into an investment account. That's damage too. And I think that is another level at which we can quantify and say, yes, okay, I know the Mormon Church does good for some people in their lives. Is there a way to help people see the truth behind Mormonism, the history, the bigotry, and come up with better ways to be good to each other? Like people say, missions are so great. Even if you leave, people who leave the church or say, I'm still so grateful for my mission because it taught me so much.
Learn the language.
But aren't there other ways that we can help young people grow and become adults that don't involve sending them and making them pay to go door to door to tell people to pay 10% of their money to the church? So I think my standpoint on Mormonism potentially is slightly more aggressive than the average person, purely because I think of my student who tried to kill himself. I think of myself as a child. I think of the little girl who has to watch her brother pass the sacrament but is told she can't. Why? Because you're a girl. And that's the only reason. You can't participate at the same level. And those are just the beginning. The more you dig into Mormonism, the more problems you find, as we've said. So I understand that Mormonism does a lot of good, but I think that sometimes that good is done at the cost of those who suffer at the doctrines that Mormonism still keeps up.
Yeah. Wow. And so when you were done, Jackson wasn't done. Is that right? Or was he done soon after you were done?
So he was done at a similar time. He actually, after my last Sunday, he met with the bishop of the ward and laid out all of his concerns. And the bishop essentially said the same thing, which is, we don't have an answer to those concerns. Or, you have to you have to have more faith. We can't know everything. We don't know the answer. I just know that Joseph Smith was a prophet. And after that meeting with the bishop, Jackson says he bore his ex-Mormon testimony to him that the church is not true, that he felt like he also was kind of absolved of he was ready to leave. So we both, I don't know if there was a certain day. I know there was a day that we both went to go get coffee. And I have a picture I took a picture of him. He took a picture of me.
For the first time
For the
ever.
first time. We got,
You're how old now?
24, I guess, by then. I'm holding my cup of coffee. And that, it's so crazy to me that I was raised in a church that made us so I didn't have a cup of coffee till I was 24.
Do you want to tell that story? Because that might be fun for people to hear.
It's fun, but it was kind of unremarkable. It's just, we just went to the coffee shop.
So like Starbucks or something else?
No, we went into, it was a local place in Salt Lake. I don't remember the name though.
Okay.
We ordered, I don't even remember what I got.
Latte probably?
Probably whatever they recommended. And it did these moments really make your brain explode, because you've been told your whole life that coffee is so bad, that it's evil, basically.
It'll keep you from your eternal salvation. It'll keep you from
eternal salvation. Yeah. If you can't keep your temple recommend if you're drinking coffee. It's the word of wisdom.
You can't return to live with Heavenly Father if you're drinking coffee.
Your salvation is on the line. So when I have my first sip and I'm the same. I am not cast into hell. I don't, become homeless immediately or a drug addict immediately or any number of other scary ills that they might warn you will befall you if you break the commandments. I just had a sip of coffee and sat with my husband and we laughed a little bit, and we're just like, it was like anticlimactic in the best way possible, because it was, it was just really, I think it was really healing, and it was really beautiful to just, and that's a lot of what the book is about, is having these moments where you finally cross this bridge that you've been told is forbidden, and you realize that the only reason that thing had any power over me is because I let it, because the church told me. And when you wear a tank top for the first time, and, when I wore a tank top for the first time, I felt so badass. It just felt so cool. I felt so like taking my life into my own hands, choosing for myself finally, choosing what I was going to put on my own body, choosing my own clothing, choosing clothing that I liked and not just clothing that was garment appropriate. It was just really exciting and really beautiful, I think, to experience.
Beautiful, powerful.
I love the way you talk about it too, because I think it is the perfect foil when the church has such intensity around every choice you make. You have this sense that it's like so easy to defile yourself or to lose your worth.
Yeah.
To have this sense of like unremarkable, unremarkable coffee, same as
And almost
before.
like I get to choose who I am. I get to, I can still be a good person. I can still know I'm a good person, even if I drink coffee.
Yeah, and that's the piece to identity. And that's where I think the deeper root of like why it's so insidious, like the message of like, particularly for women, I feel, is just like when you're given, and I've said this before on the podcast, when you're given like so small a space to live and breathe and develop in your life, it's so easy to have that value be diminished, right? And so I love this idea too of like nothing, your identity is so much larger as it turns out than what we were conditioned to believe about ourselves. So as you go through the book, that's what I love most, is this sense of like, oh, I'm trying this thing, I'm trying this thing, I'm trying this thing. All, that the church was like, fear your salvation, fear everything you love in your life with this choice. And at the end, you're like, and my identity is still intact, as it turns out. Like, we are so much bigger than we have been conditioned to believe. And I love that in the book, because I feel like you show that as you move through. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's something very empowering about having these experiences when you've been told for so long that they make you a bad person, and then to just really realize that it's so not true, and that what Mormonism teaches is a good person, which is not watching R-rated movies, not drinking coffee, wearing garment appropriate clothing. Really, you can still be a pretty awful human and do all of those things. And you can do all of those things and still be a really wonderful, empathetic, kind, sweet, wonderful human being. That watching an R-rated movie doesn't make you bad. And I think I bought into these things make you bad for so long that when I finally stepped out of that box and allowed myself to, watch The Notebook or, all of these things that growing up my friends got to enjoy and experience, and, even Schindler's List, me and Jackson watched that. I always wanted to see that, but I never did because it was rated R. And that's one of the most beautiful, sad, touching movies imaginable. But I never watched it because it was rated R. And that's really allowing a rules-based religion to decide how you'll move through your life. And I love being out of the church, finally choosing for myself how I move through my life.
Yeah.
And asking, and when confronted with a question, should I try drinking? Should I be a stay-at-home mom? Should I pursue this career option? Instead of saying, let me pray about it and ask God and feel if I feel a feeling, I finally, for the first time in my life after leaving the church, could say, what do I want? Like, I never considered that before I left the church. What do I want? And I'm going to do it. And even if you make a choice that leads to a mistake, at least it's your own mistake. Like, I chose teaching and that was a mistake. But at least now if I make a mistake, I can say it was my own mistake. It came from me. It's not some outsourced choice I made at the hands of a God that came from the mouth of my dad. So I truly love, and I think I meet ex-Mormons who have been out for 10 years and have never tried coffee, and they've never worn a tank top, and they've never done all these tiny little things, but they've been out of the church. It's almost like they leave the church, they lose their testimony, but they never figure out how to embrace the world, embrace everything the world has to offer, and learn to love what's outside their door, because it's very scary. But I think being empowered to find things to replace Mormonism with is very empowering, and it's very fulfilling. And to me, it's really helped me build myself back up into who I am now, which to me now is a much more, I feel much more possessed by my own identity than I ever have before. I no longer push down certain parts of myself because I'm trying to appeal to an outside authority. I just ask myself, am I happy? Do I like it? Is it a good choice? Is it a happy choice? Is it a kind choice? Do I want to do this? And being led by your own mind for once, instead of being led by God, is very, it's really centering, I think.
Yeah. I love how you focus on the difference in kind of where you root or ground yourself is in empowerment, connection to yourself, and choice. That is something that is different, is that being conscious of choice. We get to choose. We have choices.
Yeah, I mean, they talk about agency a lot in the church, but there's not a lot of agency in the church. Obviously, they'll say, well, you can choose to be baptized and go to heaven and live in the celestial kingdom, or you can choose not to. Those are the choices.
With none of your family.
With none of your family, and you'll be in the celestial kingdom, versus having the ability to just say, what I have on this earth is here in front of me. I wanted to write a book. I've always wanted to write a book. I decided to do that. And a lot of parts of myself said, no one will ever read this book. But I ultimately had to just say, if no one ever reads this, I just want to do it because I have had this dream for so long and I want it. So I will follow my dream purely not because of a revelation or because of anything. Father's blessing. I just want to choose to do something for once in my life because I want it.
Yeah.
And when I was writing it, a lot of times I'd wake up at 4 a.m. or 5 a.m. to write it before my kids woke up. And I'd be writing it and be like, no one's ever going to read this. And I just wanted to do it because, God damn it, I wanted to do it.
Yeah.
And I'm really proud. I'm really proud of myself. And I hope that everyone that leaves the church can do something that they're deeply proud of, that they feel really passionate about, impassioned by, that they can say, I did this. I lived my dream. I did the thing that I've always dreamed of after I left. Whatever that was. Maybe you finally can get married to the person that you've loved. Maybe you can finally pursue the career you've been interested in, or whatever it is. I think this book is meant to, and hopefully will encourage the readers to just live a life that is led from within.
Beautiful mic drop. I have a question that you can just say you don't want to talk about or answer, but I want to just throw it out there. you and I crossed paths unknowingly several years ago when I attended the wedding of a dear friend of mine, Tyler, and his wife, Cara Lee. His bride at the time, Cara Lee. Cara Lee is?
My sister, yeah.
Yeah. So what year was that wedding?
Probably 2014, 15.
So Cara Lee would have, Tyler and Cara Lee would have gotten married while you were still believing, right?
Yes.
So the way that Mormon families work, whoever goes out first is blamed for whoever goes out second.
Yeah.
So I imagine that there might be people in your family who would want to say that it was, let's just say, as an example, Tyler and Cara Lee, or Cara Lee and Tyler, that were the cause and of you ultimately leaving. I want you to talk, if you want to just address the reality or non-reality of that statement, that's fine. It would also be great if you could explain why assumptions like that can be very insulting and hurtful to people like you. So that's a two-part question.
So what's the first part?
So if somebody wants to say, well, it must have been the Aldens, you know what I mean?
Right.
And Cara Lee and the Aldens, right?
I think so much is done to program members to think that there's no good reason to leave. And that any reason someone leaves always falls under the umbrella of laziness, coercion, bad influence.
Wanted to sin.
Wanted to sin.
Got offended.
It can never be because it was the best thing, because you were right. Like, you'll never hear a member of the church say, I'm so proud of you for leaving. I'm so proud you made that really hard decision for yourself. That sounds so difficult. It's only either silence or a brief conversation filled with sadness. But I think when Cara Lee left, my sister, I really wanted to, I think I wanted to be able to claim, at least in my mind, and know for myself that I had left on my own 2 feet and that I was not dragged out by some other person and that I was not coerced or, given some anti-Mormon information that ruined my testimony, but that it was really a choice that I made for myself. And so I actually didn't tell my sister I was even having a faith crisis at all until after we had fully left. I called her the day after I had my first glass of wine, actually, because that felt like a very definitive, like, I have...
Hey, there's no going back after that.
News
I mean, you're pretty lost after that.
Yeah, so I felt the need, and I think a lot of ex-Mormons feel the need to leave in a very particular way that gives them a sense of legitimacy, which is very silly because you don't need to legitimize your choice to anyone. But because I think members and the church demonizes leaving so thoroughly, it's really insulting to feel like there's no intellectually pure way to leave the church.
Legitimate, intellectually,
yes,
or morally, or spiritually
yes.
legitimate.
There's
right?
none of those things can ever be the case. You're always going to be the black sheep. You're always going to be the one that couldn't hold on long enough.
The empty chair, the disappointment, the
yes.
faithless.
So I didn't want to tell her till I was sure, because I wanted to have it be just, I wanted to be able to easily say, this was my choice. This is my choice. I didn't even talk to Cara Lee or my sister.
And it was your own.
And it was my own. And I don't think that everyone needs to feel that way. And I don't even think I should have felt that way. I wish I honestly, looking back, would have confided in her, because I think she probably would have helped me a lot and emotionally supported me along the way. But I think the church's narrative about people leaving is what kept me from confiding in her, because I didn't want her poisoning the well, which is so silly because she's my sister.
Otherwise known as being your sister.
Yeah. She's my sister. I wish, in hindsight, I would have had a little bit more confidence in my own decision making to say, I don't care what other people think. If I talk to her, that's my choice. I want to talk to my sister about this.
Part of it reminds me a little bit of like the natural man philosophy too. just that, and this exists, I feel like, even with, you brought it up with sisters. I think sometimes it comes up with couples. If a husband leaves first, then it's sort of like, yeah, well, the husband, like, he led you out or he influenced you. But there's this idea of like contagion too, or that, you know, we're so weak-minded if we come close to someone who is making different decisions or differentiating or critical thinking, we're going to be like, we're just lost. It's almost back to the idea of what you experienced when you were 13 or so with the men and the women. Like men and their desires. They have no control. Like the natural man is just a little bit pathetic without these saving graces and without the church. Lucky for us that we are, you know, made pure and strong through kind of the church. And I think that exists
superior.
here.
Don't forget superior.
And superior. But I think that exists here too, with like oftentimes with in relation to study critical thinking. And when people leave, it's just sort of like, yeah, like it's insidious that way. Like we're so weak-minded that we'll be influenced, and therefore like really it's part of our separateness and insularity within Mormonism to that's key. It's key to keeping us like away from actually other humans, you know?
Yeah. For sure. By design. Yeah.
Wait, there was a second part to your question, right?
I think she answered it.
Okay.
Just that it's insulting.
Okay.
Yeah. When you tell someone that they left because somebody else pulled them out, you're saying you didn't think this through. You don't have a brain for yourself.
Yeah.
You're easily influenced by other people.
Yeah, it reminds me of on your mission, you're allowed to baptize someone after 3 weeks of they have to go to church 3 times and take all the lessons, and then they can get baptized. So some people get baptized in 3 weeks, and everybody celebrates that. Like, wow, a conversion in 3 weeks. This is so beautiful, so exciting. Overnight conversion, the golden investigator. But if you leave the church over 3 weeks, that's so looked down upon as like you only cared about it enough to think about it for 3 weeks. You know, you're supposed to struggle with this for years and years and years. And we love and accept these converts who get baptized in 3 weeks, but we can't love and accept the people who leave in 3 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And many of those converts are leaving their church to come to ours, right?
And then probably go back at some point.
Okay, cool. All right. So you had a few other kind of sections to your outline about your journey. I know that tomorrow we're going to be talking about sort of 10 tips on how to leave the Mormon Church. I know that Margie has a part of your book she wants you to close with. So before we get to that, let's make sure we include any final parts of your story today.
I think that it's a good one, first part, second part, because I feel like to understand part 2, you kind of have to understand the leaving process. I think it's something that, you know, as you leave the church, I'm sure I've shared a lot of the same feelings and emotions and thought patterns you have to face as you leave. That's part 1, is the leaving. And I think of my book as kind of CES letter part 2, because I feel like you have the leaving and the deconstruction and the breakdown and the loss. And then the book is part 2, which is the let's build after, let's fill back up, let's create something to come from this. And let's make something really beautiful and better than before. Not living in the shadow of who you are as a Mormon, but becoming something much greater and more complex and self-fulfilled than before is my hope. Mm-hmm. So I would say for the outline, a lot of this translates very well to part 2. So I'm happy to read if you had.
Well, I thought it would be a lovely way to just sort of close out your story and to give people now just a taste of your writing and a taste of the book. I mean, I don't know how you would feel about it, but the part that I kind of talked to you.
So while Margie's looking it up, I'm going to plug it again. The book is How to Leave the Mormon Church, an Ex-Mormon's Guide to Rebuilding After Religion by Alyssa Grenfell. Forward by, I'm honored to say, forward by me, John DeLynn. And a link to this book is in the description of this episode. I would love it if this book became a #1 bestseller across the United States. But don't do it for that alone, even though we want to support our authors and healers. Do it because you or people you love are going to benefit from the thoughtfulness and the wisdom and the tips and the advice and the courage of this book. So with that, Margie, what did you love about this section? Why do you think it's a great way to close today?
Well, I kind of want it to stand on its own.
All right. That's
I
good.
just think it's a beautiful way to
Okay.
end.
So
And
this
it
is
will
Alyssa
showcase her
Grenfell
writing.
reading from her book, How to Leave the Mormon Church. Page what?
Page 240.
All right.
And before I read too, just to add to what you were saying about the book, there's 2 parts. The first part of the book is meant for people who are new in the process of leaving, maybe in the first 6 months or so. It deals with how to tell your family, new frameworks to investigate as far as belief goes, how to be careful and not move so fast that you make mistakes. The second part is much more for, I would say, like 6 months, ex-Mormon and onward. A lot of the topics I cover, I think, are things that even if you've been out for 5 or 10 years, might still be applicable, because I think Mormonism lingers in many ways. And so if you're considering purchasing it and you think, I've been out for a long time, the second half is truly something that I think could last for or be applicable for a very long time. So just one more plug.
All right.
So this is what I'm going to read is from the last chapter, which is called Commencement, so like graduation, and it's about becoming an ex-Mormon. And I hope I don't get emotional, so I'm going to
Wait, we like it when you get emotional. What are you talking about?
Well, usually
That's the good stuff.
It would make sense if you did.
Okay.
It would be preferable if
Well,
you did.
you might have a hard time understanding what I'm saying if I cry. So
And they'll get the book for the second over.
okay. Here we go. Life is not what I dreamed of as a kid. These days, when I wake up in the morning, I lace up my shoes and go for a run. Jackson watches our 2 boys once they wake up and makes them breakfast. He never needs to ask me what our kids like to eat or where to find their socks. He already knows. When I get back from my run, I make our coffee. We sip and chat while my oldest Eli plays with Legos at the table. My youngest West toddles from toy to toy, occasionally glancing back to make sure his dad and I are where he left us. Jackson heads to work while I stay home with the kids. During nap time, I work on my book. It's taken me 2 slow years, and I'm in the editing phase, and it feels triumphant. Once nap time ends, I take the boys out for a bike ride. I wear a tank top and athletic shorts. We stop under an oak tree and sip water in the cool shade. If Eli falls off his bike, he cries, and I give him hugs and kisses. I don't lecture him, boys don't cry. Instead, we talk through what happened and how he can be safer next time. That night, Jackson cooks dinner while I play with the kids. He brings up an interesting article about legalizing psilocybin, and I share a podcast I recently heard on the topic. After the table is set, I pour 2 glasses of wine, and Eli asks if we can say cheers. We clink our glasses with his water and toast to the day. Jackson plays Dark Side of the Moon while we eat. We discuss meeting friends at a brewery over the weekend. Let's suggest the one with the playground. Eli and Wes will love it. I put the kids to bed while Jackson cleans the kitchen after dinner. Once the kids are asleep, we watch Kill Bill. We've been working our way through all the Quentin Tarantino films. Jackson's favorite is Pulp Fiction, and mine is Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. After the movie ends, we lay in bed and discuss the future. Jackson's business is doing well. Hopefully soon, he'll quit his job and work for himself full-time. He asks for my thoughts on his current website design. We discuss my book, and I ask for him to read a chapter and give me feedback. He tells me he's proud of me. I smile and respond, I'm proud of you too. While this day feels typical to me, it's interwoven with moments I never imagined as an active Mormon, and yet these average, ordinary days are the most magical, beautiful times of my life. My father never cooked us dinner. My Mormon friends rarely have help when cleaning the kitchen. My garments would keep me from wearing a tank top and shorts on a bike ride. From R-rated movies to psychedelic discussions, the discussions between Jackson and me are as vast and open as the expanse of the universe. Nothing is off limits. Eli has also heard his dad never say, "Boys don't cry," and he's never seen either of us pray. He doesn't know who Jesus Christ is, and every day he sees his father cooking and cleaning and treating his mother with respect. Sometimes Jackson smokes on our patio, and I enjoy an occasional glass of wine with dinner. We are still good stewards of our family. We decide what little pieces compose our day. Every interaction and choice is tinged with love for our children, love for each other, and love for ourselves. Owning your own life is remarkably intoxicating. I hope in reading this book and working through each chapter, you've begun to feel the same way. I hope your new days outside of Mormonism are as unremarkable and simultaneously unexpected as mine. You are doing so well, reader. I hope if no one in your life is loving you and praising you for making such a difficult, courageous life change, you feel it from me. I am proud of you. I see you and your struggles. If I was sitting there next to you, I would give you a massive hug. You can do this. You can leave the Mormon Church. Leave it behind completely. Root it out of yourself and your heart and your mind. Keep only what serves you, what makes you happy and lifts those around you. For the rest, find it, examine it, learn from it, and then toss it to the ground. The rest of your life is anxiously waiting for you. Go out and live it. Excuse me.
So beautiful.
Thank you for suggesting to read that. I didn't think I would cry that much, but...
You knew you were going to cry.
Well, I knew I was going to cry, but I didn't think the tears would actually fall. I thought that That
was beautiful. Great suggestion. That was beautiful. Thank you. Yeah. Did you want to say anything about that, Margie? And what you loved about it, or let it stand on its own, like you said?
I think it does showcase the writing, and I do feel like in this book, it's and I've already told Alyssa this. I think it is very difficult to do what she did, where you're writing from a practical space. You also are not trying to be didactic or give a formula or instruct. So it's factual, it's practical, it's accessible. And your story is interwoven. There are personal experiences. You have other people sharing stories in it. So there's this connection to you as the writer, as the reader. I spent all day yesterday reading it. And there's care. I just felt so cared for. I mean, my transition has been years. It's been, several years ago now. But like the care, the prompts, it's an incredible just... mix of very tough things to do all at once. But I loved that because to me, it's what awaits. And it's so opposite of what we've been told as Mormons awaits us. And I love how you always are coming back to the magic and of the unremarkable, that there's magic there. And I just think I feel hope, and I feel, and the emotional impact of that too, and the writing. I mean, it's good writing.
Thank you. Well, thank you. And I feel like I really tried to write exactly what I needed to hear when I was in the midst of my despair, which I think is that there's really is hope, and that things can be really unremarkable and feel like you're just so normal, but also somehow so different from what you ever thought was possible. And I'm glad you liked it so much.
Absolutely.
And we say these things in the name of Alyssa Grenfell. Amen. The book, again, is How to Leave the Mormon Church, an Ex-Mormon's Guide to Rebuilding After Religion. You can get it on Amazon in ebook form or in
paperback or hardcover.
Or hardcover.
Audible coming soon.
And come back tomorrow for sure, because we have not even started with kind of the sections of the book, and I think it'll give you a really great taste for the book and how the layout and kind of what I was saying in a way that you'll really appreciate.
It'll be top 10 tips for leaving the Mormon Church. So that'll be tomorrow. And buy the book, buy it for others. And thank you, Alyssa, for coming all this way. Thanks for Margie for all you add. And thanks to Julia and Maven for what they do, and Gerardo and Brooklyn for all that they do to make our production possible, and our board. And mostly I just want to thank the donors who donate to Mormon Stories and the Open Stories Foundation. We couldn't do this without your support. So thank you. And if you value not just Mormon Stories, but our ability to help use our platform to elevate other important creators, we always would appreciate your support. So go to mormonstories.org if you want. If you're in the position to, click on the donate button, become a monthly donor. And for as long as we can, we'll keep providing this sort of content for you as well. But today, if you do anything, buy this book, because that's the thing. All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Be good to each other. Be kind to each other. And we'll see you all again soon on another episode of Mormon Stories Podcast. Take care, everybody.